Suspect is ready, right?
Indeed, he is.
Yay!
I've been ready for 2 weeks, gang. Let's
Hola,
go.
chico. How you doing? My camera on, so I can keep it off, right? But I can screen share my computer monitor, right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, the screen share. Okay. All right then. Who wants to go first? Right, do you want to go first
You
or me
gotta
go
go
first?
first. You're the
All right.
affirmative, gang. But hold on,
Mhm.
Either
bro.
or.
Like, just chill out for a second.
Yeah,
Like, let's
we'll just
people
wait
join,
for the
bro.
announcement to come out, and then
Yeah,
we
I'm
can.
waiting. I'm waiting. Let everybody join.
Chill out, gang. Chill out.
Chill out. Did anyone see that new those debates on modern day debate like recently this week?
Yeah, West Spine Philosophy got destroyed. Yeah.
Oh man.
Okay.
Da, 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 da.
Christos anesti ek necron patis.
Yo, Cozz, did you prepare?
Did I prepare?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have my slides, everything. I
Are you
may
sure you
have
prepared?
I may have made a little bit too many slides, but I should be able to manage. I should be able to manage.
Well, you better be able to manage in the cross exam because there's some pressing that's gonna happen.
Sure, no
Ooh.
worries.
Okay, we look here. Um. Okay, let's start. Welcome everybody. This is an official stage debate between two servers, Christ-centered and the Yellow Islam one. The topic would be: Are the Gospels historically reliable?
Hmm.
On the affirmative, we have suspected. We have he is a co-owner of the Islam server. He is undertaking a bachelor's in Islamic studies, and he has a very handsome beard. So hopefully he will make a good case. Oh wait, he's oh sorry, not in the affirmative, in the negative. My
Yeah,
bad.
I was gonna say the negative. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we have, on the other hand, we have Cozz, a
Mhm.
representative of the Christ-centered server. Everybody loves Cozz. Without
Maybe
further,
everybody.
yeah, maybe everybody. Um, without further yapping, I'll just hand it over to you, Cozz. Go ahead.
But
Alrighty,
make
so
sure everyone, hold on. Everyone, make sure they get the sources channel. I just put it in the chat. Also, where's everyone chatting, bro? Like, where's everyone talking?
Oh
it would be
yeah,
in the
the
other. I think it's in the other stage VC because they were there too.
yeah, for anybody not yeah, that's my bad.
All right.
Everybody
Tell everyone
unfamiliar, you will
tell everyone where
see.
they can talk. Tell everyone where they can talk and where they can get the sources channel.
Okay,
Yeah,
source channel.
above
Yeah.
the regular text channels, there will be two channels. A gospel discussion one. Here's where you all of you guys can ask questions and just have a chat while the two debaters are going at it. And the debates, sorry, and the sources one. Here, this will be where the two people post their sources during the cross exams and stuff.
Also, pull up Joe.
Um,
Pull up Joe. Pull up Joe. Pull up Joe Esther. Pull up Joe Esther. Joe Esther,
mhm.
a hand. Be hand up.
Yeah, I'll add this to my channels so I can use it.
Yeah, I don't know where it is. I can't
All
look,
right, we
bro.
have Joseph, the owner of the Islam server, coming up.
Yo, Aura has arrived.
Hola, como Estacio.
Come on, dude, plug your server already. We don't have all day.
Yeah, bro. Don't worry. We're gonna plug it, bro. Don't worry. Discord.gg/Sunni. Everyone, make sure to join, bro. It's time server. Join there for debates and stuff. We're gonna have events there, but also Where is that channel that I'm supposed to post stuff? Where's everyone gonna be talking? I don't get it, bro.
It should be
Above the regular text
under.
channels, there should be two channels. Wait, don't you guys see it?
I don't see the sources. Oh no, gospel discussion and sources. Yeah, got it now. Yep, source and gospel discussion. I'll be adding the sources after, or would you prefer before?
Do I have media perms? Let's see.
Yeah.
Do I? Wait, do I have media perms? Should
Yeah,
I
I
be
got
able to
media
upload
perms, bro.
Yeah,
sources?
everything
Okay.
should be set up.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Yep. We're good now. Yep.
All right. As I was saying, no further yapping. Let's just start with the 20 minutes opening statement for
I
Cause.
can't screen share.
Go
I
ahead.
can't screen share.
Oh wait, let me fix that.
Yeah, I can't screen share.
Probably better just to post your slides in the chat, but up to you, bro. Up to you, bro.
I mean, no. Screenshotting would be a lot harder. It would take a lot more time.
That's true.
I just want to
Take
make
a
it
screen
quicker
share.
so that because there's 28 slides, so I'll be having to speed talk maybe a few of them, so or summarizing them. Because if I don't, it'll take up too much time. I
Yeah.
timed myself before. It was almost. I almost hit the 20-minute mark, so I'm gonna just summarize a little bit of it.
Can you screen share now?
Yes, I can. Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
All right.
All right. I'll start your timer as soon as you start as soon as you start speaking. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you. Okay. You can start now. So I'll be arguing on the affirmative of the thought authenticity of the gospel accounts of the apostles. This is pertaining to the canonical gospels known as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll be establishing the method, the evidence, and the scholarly practice of what we call the canonical gospels. The disclaimer I'll establish first is before we discuss this, what the gospels say about Jesus, we must first establish how historians determine whether any ancient text is historical at all. This presentation is not an argument for inspiration, inerrancy, theology, or doctrine. It is an argument about the historical claims of the gospel accounts of the apostles using the general methodology that scholars apply to ancient history. If the standards that are outlined in this presentation are rejected, then not only the Gospels fall, but most of ancient history collapses with them. What is historicity? Basic definition, historicity is the quality of being based on or part of historical fact, as opposed to myth, using established historical criteria and methodology. As we repeated in the previous slide, historicity is not about inerrancy of a text, inspiration, theology, and modern journalism. What is historical methodology and criteria? So, the definition of historical methodology refers to a systematic approach used by historians to study, interpret, or explain and understand past events. It involves the collection of data from primary and secondary sources, critical analysis, and the synthesis of findings to construct a coherent or consistent and accurate account of history. This method is essential for understanding historical events and phenomena, challenging prevailing narratives, and informing contemporary debates and decision making. In contrast, the criteria and research methodology definition refers to the specific standards and guidelines that researchers use to evaluate the quality of their research. These criteria can include the validity, reliability, and relevance of the data collected, the appropriateness of the research design, and the rigor of the analysis conducted. Both definitions are crucial for the academic discipline of history, as they provide a framework for historians to analyze and interpret/explain historical data, identify patterns and trends, and develop explanations for historical events. In this presentation, these two terms will be demonstrated and applied to the canonical gospel accounts. So, methodology for historicity, as we would usually find even through scholars, is the first sequential steps in analyzing and studying historicity, that is specifically ancient history, is to establish primary sources versus secondary sources. Determine the genre of these primary sources, analytic, biographical, epic, apologetic, etc. Then ask the big question. What was the author trying to do? Was he, she, or they trying to persuade, or record events, or entertain, or moralize, or even polemicize? As we go through these sequential steps in each slide, demonstrating methodology according to his scholarship about ancient history, these same standards will be applied directly to the historicity of the memoirs of the apostles. Second section would be the second sequential steps in analyzing and studying historicity in regard to ancient history is external criticism. Is the document genuine? Manuscript tradition, paleography, archaeology, and textual criticism are used to establish approximate date of composition, provenance, and integrity. Also, with interpolations, redactions, and layers. Third section would be, alongside external criticism, is internal criticism. We examine and evaluate authorial bias, access to information. Is there any eyewitnesses, hearsay, or is it archival? Motivation, political, theological, propagandistic, and internal consistency, along with plausibility relative to known culture, cultural, political, and material realities. This is the same standard used from Thucydides to modern historiography. The next sequential step is contextualization. Historical plausibility. Does it fit with established background? A claim is more credible if it coheres with known political structures, economic systems, social norms, linguistic environment, archaeological evidence, comparative cultural patterns, and so on. The step following this one is a little smaller, but very important, detecting anachronism. Identify elements that reflect the later period's concerns, vocabulary, or institutions. Anachronisms often signal legendary development or later editorial layers. The next approach in the methodology, which is used also as a criterion, is multiple attestation and independent convergence. Independent attestation is the fact a claim gains credibility when it appears in multiple independent sources or traditions. Independence is key because two texts copying each other count as one witness. Convergence of evidence, even if no single source is strong, archaeology plus epigraphy plus literary sources and material culture can converge to support a historical reconstruction. Historians often speak of this as the cumulative case. Criterion of embarrassment slash dissonance. This is used cautiously, of course. This is often used as a criterion for the gospel accounts, as it is also used in the methodology of history and can work for both cases. This step is not universally applied, but widely recognized. The act of details that run against the interests, ideology, or self-presentation of the author or community are less likely to be invented. Use carefully because, obviously, embarrassment is culturally relative. Authors may include such material for rhetorical reasons. A little step which comes after this one is criterion of coherence, which is also used in methodology. Once some facts are established with reasonable confidence, it would necessarily follow that additional details cohere with those facts in the broader context but become more plausible. Explanatory power and minimal hypothesis. Historians prefer reconstructions that explain the most data, require the fewest and ad hoc assumptions, fit the known cultural and political environment, and align with what is typical of human behavior in comparable societies. This is essentially the application of inference to the best explanation in historical reasoning. Archaeological and material corroboration. This isn't as used in the methodology we're going to be using, but it would require inscriptions, coins, and administrative documents, settlements, patterns, stratigraphy, radiocarbon, and dendrochronological data. Literary claims that contradict strong archaeological evidence are usually downgraded. Probabilistic, not certainty-based conclusions. Ancient history rarely yields, or let's just say concedes to, absolute certainty. Historians assign degrees of confidence, like well established, plausible, possible, or even unhistorical, if there's less or no evidence for it. This probabilistic approach is self part of the methodology and the avoidance of circularity, even in logic. A key methodological norm is to not assume the reliability of a source in order to prove the reliability of the same source. Each claim must be evaluated independently. In modern historiography, that is the study of historical writings, when we evaluate and examine these things, it emphasizes explicitly stating assumptions, clear separation of data from interpretation, acknowledgement of uncertainty, and avoidance of overconfident reconstructions. The general overview of this is that ancient historicity assessment is built on rigorous source criticism, contextual plausibility, independent attestation and convergence, archaeological corroboration, probabilistic reasoning, and transparency and avoidance of circularity. This methodology appears across mainstream historical method textbooks, classical historiographic scholarship, biblical studies methodology, ancient Near Eastern studies, and Greco-Roman historiography. In scholarship, as we're talking about what the Gospels are and their genre, in scholarship about ancient history and historiography, the canonical Gospels are approximately equal to Greco-Roman bioe, ancient biographies, especially Plutarch's Lives, Suetonius' Lives of the Caesars, and Tacitus' Agricola, sometimes included, of course. Why this comparison is sound to the methodology? The same literary genre family, because modern scholarship classifies the Gospels as bioe, meaning Greek lives, not myth, not novel, not epic. This is argued by Richard Burridge in his book of What Are the Gospels, Michael Licona, Craig Keener, a broad range of classicists and anti-scholars support this. Bioe is basically the focus on a central figure, arrange material thematically, not chronologically, and includes speeches, anecdotes, and moral characterization, along with aim to convey the significance of his real person's life. This is exactly what Plutarch and Suetonius do. Canonical Gospels, comparison to ancient biographies. The next reason for the comparison being sound in the methodology established is similar distance between events and writing. Typical time gaps would be that Plutarch's writing about Alexander is approximately 400 years after Alexander. Suetonius writing about Julius Caesar is approximately 150 years after Julius Caesar, and Tacitus writing about Tiberius is approximately 80 years. By contrast, in scholarship, Mark is approximately 40 years after Jesus, Matthew and Luke are approximately 50 to 60 years, and John is approximately 60 to 65 years. By ancient history standards, the gospel accounts are unusually close to the events they describe. Rejecting the gospels on the basis of time gap alone would require rejecting a massive portion of accepted ancient biography. Similar use of sources. Plutarch and Suetonius rely on oral tradition, use earlier written sources now lost, incorporate anecdotes, speeches, and thematic material, show authorial shaping but not wholesale invention. The gospel accounts, in comparison, rely on oral tradition as well, use earlier written sources, Mark, Q hypothesis, etc., incorporate anecdotes, speeches, and thematic material, show authorial shaping but not wholesale invention. Methodologically, they stand on the same footing. And of course, similar manuscript traditions. For many classical works, earliest manuscripts are approximately even 700, 1,000 years after composition. Textual corruption is common. Manuscript counts are low, often under 10. For the Gospel accounts, earliest manuscripts within decades, P52 fragment. This can be debated, of course. Earliest complete manuscripts, approximately 250 years after. Manuscript count, thousands, which is generalized. Rejecting the Gospel accounts on manuscript grounds would require rejecting nearly all classical biography. Now, to continue with the summary, similar methodology for evaluating historicity. Historians apply multiple citation, contextual plausibility, coherence, consistency basically, thorough bias analysis, genre expectations, archaeological correlation, and so on. This methodology is applied identically to Plutarch, Suetonius, Tacitus, and the Gospel accounts. If one rejects Gospel accounts using this methodology, one must also reject much of Suetonius' life of Julius Caesar, Plutarch's life of Alexander, Tacitus' Agricola, and many other standard historical sources. This is why scholars emphasize methodological consistency. And then, of course, we're going into more detail here. If one rejects the Gospel accounts using standard ancient history methodology, then one must also reject Suetonius' account of Julius Caesar, Plutarch's account of Alexander, Tacitus' account of Tiberius, most of what we know about Socrates from Plato and Xenophon, much of early Roman history from Livy, much of early Greek history from Herodotus, and because all of these have equal or worse time gaps, rely on oral tradition as well, contain authorial shaping, have fewer manuscripts, and are less archaeologically corroborated. This is why historians emphasize consistency. If the gospel accounts fail the test, nearly all ancient biography fails with them. As this presentation is explained and set forth the methodology used by modern scholarship for ancient history and historiography, and it established the same literary genre of the gospel accounts as ancient biographies by a wing, and compared them to ancient biographies with similar styles and requiring the same methodology to study and analyze them effectively. Now we'll begin with the criteria for the gospel accounts. Beginning with eyewitness and eyewitness proximate testimony, the core idea of the standard or criterion is that the gospel accounts are not distant legends. They are rooted in the memories of people who saw and heard Jesus or who were in close contact with those who did. Richard Bauckham argues that the Gospels are close to the eyewitnesses and that named characters often function as sources or guarantors of tradition. This is from his work Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, in which he develops the idea of enclosure in the word of eyewitness testimony, e.g., Peter and Mark, the beloved disciple and John, and so on. And he argues that this matches known historiographical practice. Martin Hangel emphasizes the short time gap between Jesus and the written Gospels, arguing that the traditions behind them are much earlier than the texts themselves. In his work, The Four Gospels and the One Gospel of Jesus Christ, he stresses that living eyewitnesses would still have been around when the traditions were being shaped. James D.G. Dunn focuses on living memory and argues that the Jesus tradition was preserved within communities still contained people that still contained people who had known Jesus or his immediate followers. In his work Jesus Remembered, he frames the gospel accounts as the literary crystallization, meaning made definite and clear, of this remembered Jesus. The conclusion is that if the traditions are anchored or grounded in living memory and eyewitnesses, the probability of the wholesale invention drops significantly. The gospel accounts become historically serious sources, not late legends, as in or similar to folklore. Early sources in proximity in time. This criterion establishes that the Gospels are based on sources that arose within a few decades of Jesus' death, well within the range historians consider usable for ancient history. John P. Mayer, the American biblical scholar, argues for a pre-Markan passion narrative and other early traditions embedded in the Gospels themselves. In his work, A Marginal Jew, especially Volume 1, he treats these as historically valuable sources, not late theological constructions. E.P. Sanders emphasizes that we can know quite a lot about Jesus and that several key facts are almost beyond dispute. In his work, The Historical Figure of Jesus, he is not defending inerrancy, of course, but he treats the Gospels as historically usable sources. N.T. Wright, in his work Jesus and the Victory of God, he places the Gospels within a broader Second Temple Jewish context and argues that the portrait of Jesus makes excellent historical sense in that world. If the core traditions are early, then the opportunity for uncontrolled legendary development is small. Therefore, the gospel accounts we have today are not from later altered versions of what is original, but would rather be first century reflections on first century events. First century Jewish context, names, geography, customs. This criterion is based on the fact that the Gospels fit first century Judaism, with a level of detail that is hard to fake from a later distant context. Richard Bauckham analyzes personal names in the Gospels and compares them with the names frequencies in first century Judea, ossuaries, inscriptions, etc. In his work, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, he shows that the pattern of names in the Gospels matches Judaic usage remarkably well. Craig Keener documents the gospel accounts with accurate knowledge of geography, social customs, and political realities. In his work, The Historical Jesus of the Gospels, he argues that this kind of detailed local knowledge supports the view that the traditions stem from a Judaic environment. Maurice Casey, though not writing as an apologist, argues that many sayings and narratives preserve Aramaic substrata, indicating early Judaic origins in his work Jesus of Nazareth. If the gospel accounts consistently get the local color right, names, places, customs, debates, this would strongly suggest from the evidence that they are from the real world of Jesus, not a fake depiction. Coherence with external sources, non-Christian and archaeological. Where the gospel accounts intersect with external data, like inscriptions, non-Christian historians, and archaeology, they tend to be confirmed rather than contradicted. Tacitus in Annals 1542 confirms that Jesus was executed under Pontius Pilate during Tiberius' reign and that a movement bearing his name arose in Judea and spread to Rome. Josephus in Antiquities 8 and 20 refers to Jesus, his brother James, and his execution under Pilate, even if one brackets later Christian interpolations. Archaeological finds, such as the Pilate inscription of Caesarea, the ossuary of Caiaphas, and the general picture of first century Galilee or Galilee and Jerusalem, align well with the Gospel's depiction of the setting. Craig Blumberg and Craig Evans often highlight these convergences in their works. Blumberg's work, The Historical Reliability of the Gospels, and Evans' Jesus in His World, Fabricating Jesus. Since these independent sources and material evidence line up with the Gospels, it concludes the case that they are generally trustworthy historical narratives. Internal coherence with realistic variation. The Gospels show the kind of variation you'd expect from multiple witnesses or traditions, not the artificial uniformity of a fabricated story. Blomberg argues that the differences among the Gospels are typical of multiple ancient witnesses and can often be harmonized or understood as complementary perspectives in his work, The Historical Reliability of the Gospels. Michael Licona treats the Gospels as ancient biographies that use known compositional devices, compression, displacement, spotlighting, and so on, without abandoning historical intent. In his work, Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? He compares gospel differences to those in Plutarch's parallel lives. Dale Allison and James Dunn, though more cautious, still treat the overlapping traditions as evidence of a stable core, remembered in slightly different ways. In Allison's
Yeah.
work of constructing Jesus,
Oh, sorry. I was just saying 2 minutes remaining.
oh, okay. Allison constructing Jesus, Dunn Jesus remembered. Real witnesses don't tell stories in identical words, they overlap on substance and differ in detail. The Gospels look like that, messy in small things, or converge in the big things. Commutative, cumulative, my English is dying. Reliability and historian scent. Christian scholars, at their best, are not arguing that every detail is perfect. They are arguing that by the standards used for other ancient sources, the Gospels are historically reliable. N.T. Wright treats the Gospels as serious historical sources whose overall portrait of Jesus makes excellent historical sense within Second Temple Judaism, in his work Jesus and the Victory of God. E.P. Sanders, though not defending Christian doctrine, famously says we can know quite a lot about Jesus and lists a set of facts about his life as almost beyond dispute. In his work, The Historical Figure of Jesus, and John P. Mayer uses strict criteria and still concludes that a substantial number of sayings and deeds of Jesus can be judged historically authentic in his work A Marginal Jew. The argument is, if we accept Plutarch, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Josephus as generally reliable despite bias, selectivity, and literary shaping, then by the same standards, we should treat the Gospels as generally reliable accounts of Jesus' life and death. This is a repeated mention of the previous explanation of the cumulative case in historical methodology, but applied as a criterion. The finality of the arguments. When all the major lines of evidence are taken together, the canonical Gospels emerge as historically reliable ancient biographies. Modern scholarship agrees that they belong to the genre of bios, meaning that they were written with the intention of recounting the life and death of a real person. Their traditions are rooted in eyewitnesses and preserved within living memory, as argued by Bauckham, Dunn, and Hengel. The sources behind them are early, often traceable to within a generation of Jesus' life, as shown by Mayer, Sanders, and Allison. Their detailed knowledge of first century Judaic names, geography, customs, and language reflects authentic local context demonstrated by Bauckham, Keener, and Casey. Where the Gospels intersect with external evidence like Josephus, Tacitus, archaeology, they are consistently corroborated, and their internal variation matches what historians expect from multiple independent witnesses, not fabrication. By the same standards used to evaluate Plutarch, Tacitus, Suetonius, and
Yeah,
other ancient historians. Sorry?
It's alright.
yeah,
Let him
that's
wrap up. Let
time.
him wrap up. Don't cut him off. Let him wrap up. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The Gospel accounts are early, contextually accurate, eyewitness connected, externally supported, and internally coherent. The cumulative result is that the Gospel accounts provide historically trustworthy accounts of the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth. That's it.
All right, lovely. Moving on to suspected's 20 minutes opening statement. The the floor is his.
All right. Let me just share my screen.
Do I
Looks
remove
like
my
you
stream, by the
officially,
way?
if you want.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, Abdul, give me
preferably.
streaming palms real
I'm just
quick.
asking to make sure, because
Oh, you two don't
Do what
have
you want,
streaming
gang.
rooms?
Yeah, give me streaming palms real quick. Or honestly, I don't even know what I'm gonna say in the rebuttal because everything he just said is already addressed in my opening statement, unfortunately for him. So, but it's okay.
Can you
All right,
stream
let me
now?
see. No, not yet.
Oh,
Just give me all the
apologies for
roles
now,
again. Give me all the
just so in
roles.
case.
Oh, I can stream now. Okay, it's because you can't stream at the same time.
Okay, you can't stream at the same time, fair enough.
All right, bet. Can y'all see my
start your time whenever you
screen?
start speaking.
All right. Alright, assalamu alaikum everyone. First of all, make sure to join discord.gg/sunni, best Islam server. But anyways, so the debate here is, are the Gospels historically reliable? Cozz is arguing that they are historically reliable. I'm saying that they are not, and we're going to be going over many reasons why they aren't. First of all, I'd like to say that pretty much everything he said in his opening statement is already addressed in my opening statement, so it's going to be unfortunate for him, and he's going to get really pressed on this. So let's just go over the outline of my presentation real quick. Firstly, we're just going to be going over historical reliability, who wrote the Gospels, major ahistorical claims from the Gospel authors, the issue of contradictions, and also the creative freedom of authors. So just regarding historical reliability, I think Cozz pretty much summed it up well. But basically, we're looking for things like independent attestation, lack of theological bias, all these kinds of things, which unfortunately the Gospels fail on every account, right? The Gospels contain theological bias in the accounts they're trying to give. The conclusions of the Gospels, the openings, all show like theological bias in what they're trying to convey. For example, the ending of John, the beginning of Mark and Matthew, etc. And also the independence. They're not independent. They're relying on each other. Even scholars are moving towards the position that John is actually relying on the synoptics. But we'll get more into that later. So first, let's look at what the experts say regarding authorship. Since we're going to look at authorship first, right? Since he keeps claiming that basically, it's eyewitness accounts or close to eyewitness accounts, whatever he wants to argue for. It's funny that he quotes Richard Bauckham in his opening statement, yet Richard Bauckham himself agrees that the argument of this book, Jesus and Eyewitnesses, which is the same book that he quoted, that the text of our Gospels are close to the eyewitness reports of the words and deeds of Jesus, run counter to almost all recent scholarship. So pretty much all scholarship disagrees with what Cozz is saying, that the Gospel, information is close or are from eyewitness sources. He's also from the New Oxford Annotated Bible. Says scholars generally agree that the Gospels were written 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus. Thus, they did not have eyewitness or contemporary accounts of Jesus' life and teachings. And we'll also address what Cos said about Plutarch and the rest later. About the time, and then also he's forged from Bar Ehrman. He says the anonymity of the gospel writers were respected for decades. When the gospels of the New Testament are alluded to and quoted by authors of the early 2nd century, they are never entitled, never named. For example, the Didache, for example, by Justin Martyr, for example, by Ignatius, for example, by Polycarp, etc. Um, so here's the outline to academic arguments for anonymity. The authors of the Gospels do not identify themselves within their narratives or texts. Specifically, Mark and Matthew make no attempt at claiming eyewitness sources. The Gospels are literarily interdependent and rely on each other for information. Early quotations of the Gospels appear with different titles without an author, like the ones I just mentioned. Early manuscripts lack titles attributing them to their authors. For example, Papyrus 1, we find that there's no heading title for Matthew, even though it has the letter Alpha at the top, showing this at the beginning of the Gospel. Uniformity in the titles appear late, so a lot of Christians apologists like to appeal to uniformity in title descriptions. Um, Even though these manuscripts appear like in the 3rd and 4th century, and we don't have early manuscripts actually attesting to the titles that are actually uniform and consistent. Also, the profiles of the authors are not consistent with the alleged authors. What does this mean? Basically, it's argued that the gospel authors are meant to be these same disciples that Jesus was teaching, even though these same disciples that Jesus was teaching, for example, like John, was an illiterate fisherman, even according to the book of Acts and according to general literary standards of that Roman Palestine. For example, uh, Weiser, one of the scholars Bar Ehrman quotes, she argues that basically the literate rate was basically like around 3% or 2% at that time, even lower than that. And that's for those who could even read and write properly, right? And most people couldn't even read at all, or write. So that's basically for the gospel authorship claims. And I'm going to be going over these again later on. But let's just go into the major ahistorical claims, which is going to be the main thorn in his argument, okay? So I'm basically going to be arguing that the Gospels make major ahistorical claims in regards to the events and the birth of Jesus, the life of Jesus, his family, the disciples around him. Let's start with one of them, the massacre of Herod. Right? Matthew claims that Herod ordered the massacre of all infants aged 2 years and younger in an attempt to kill Jesus. This is found in Matthew's nativity account. This event is recorded nowhere in any source of history, and more so is absent in comprehensive records about Herod. Josephus also has access to Herod's own official records, including a journal kept by his closest advisor, Nicholas of Damascus, and there is simply nothing like that, even though there are several episodes of Herod committing mass violence. Here's, for example, from Raymond Brown's book, As for the Massacre of Bethlehem, Josephus, the Jewish historian, documents thoroughly the final years of the reign of Herod the Great, concentrating on his brutal deeds, yet he never mentions a massacre of the children at Bethlehem, right? And basically, Raymond Brown argues this is not a historical account. And he's also Born Divine from Robert Miller. He explains how the story can't stand on its own apart from Matthew's narrative. The story could only be historical if Jesus was actually born in Bethlehem, which he was not, and I can get more into that if he wants to argue against that. And the scene meshes seamlessly with Matthew's strategy of modeling the infancy of Jesus after the story of baby Moses, right? So again, theological bias. Cozz specifically said in his opening statement that one of the tests or criteria is if these authors had theological bias, wanted to polemicize. Well, Matthew wanted to polemicize. He wanted to argue Jesus had Davidic descent. He wanted to argue that Jesus is a parallel of Moses, and he constructs his narrative very creatively to do this. So that's one major ahistorical claim. Let's go to the next one, the Lucan census. Luke says that Augustus, the emperor of Rome, issues a worldwide empire-wide census where everyone had to return to their ancestral hometowns, meaning you must return to the hometown of your ancestors. Luke says Joseph must return to Bethlehem, the city of his ancestor David. He also says this census happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria. There is a mountain load of problems with this census. Let's go through them one by one. Firstly, there's no record of an empire-wide census ever being conducted in Roman history. Not only that, but we know this wouldn't have occurred because Judea at the time was a client kingdom, meaning Herod had free reign over his land and could not be forced into registrations as a client as long as he paid the territory taxes. Second issue is basically the ancestral homeland. This type of census never happened in history and would be completely nonsensical. Basically, Luke is saying that Caesar Augustus told everyone to return to their ancestral homelands to be registered for a census. Imagine like Donald Trump in the United States asked everyone to return to which country they're from to register for a census. Makes no sense, there's no practical usage for it, and it's impossible to even apply practically. This is just part of Luke's narrative to try and get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem, and David, since he's from Bethlehem, is saying he's from the descent of David. And he's also scholars talking about this. Robert Miller. He's another major issue with Luke's census. Basically, this is the next issue, and probably the biggest issue, is that Luke places this census when Quirinius was governor of Syria, which is fine since there was a census conducted by him at this time. However, Quirinius was not governor until 6 AD, and Herod the Great died in 4 BC. So Luke has a 10-year time gap in his story that is historically inconsistent, right? Basically, Luke says in Luke 1:5 that this happened during the time of Herod the Great. In Luke 2, he also argues that this happened when Quirinius was governor of Syria, but there's a 10-year time gap, complete major ahistorical claim, even though we're supposed to believe that Luke is actually documenting the complete accounts of the Lord and everything that he mentions at the beginning of Luke 1. These are different, basically, appeals apologists try to make. For example, apologists appeal to different evidences to say that it still does fit. For example, they appeal to this Latin inscription that talks about a governor ruling twice in Syria. The general consensus of historians is that this was not Quirinius. It mentions nothing about him, and we already know who was governor of Syria when Herod died, and it wasn't Quirinius. Another explanation apologists appeal to is that Josephus is the one who misstated the census and not Luke. This explanation finds itself dismissed by the general consensus of scholars and is most popularly represented in John Rhodes's paper, Did Josephus Misstate the Census? However, Clayton Croy, in Escaping Shame, Mary's Dilemma and the Birthplace of Jesus, he talks about how Rhodes argues that these three Judases are the same person based on the name of the other similarities. He tries to argue that Josephus is mixing up different Judases and he's the one mixing up the timelines. But the equation of the last two has been seriously proposed by a number of scholars, but also strongly contested. The equation of both of them with the first Judas is far more idiosyncratic. The idea of identity of all three Judases is dubious proposition that presupposes significant confusion on the part of Josephus. So essentially, this claim by Luke doesn't, fit with any historical criteria when it comes to any other attestation and contradicts every other attestation we have from Josephus in that time. According to academics, Luke's confusion has a historical explanation in that he confused two major events in the Roman Empire. He confuses two rebellions in the kingdom, one in 4 BC and one in 6 AD. This is natural, as even today, with access to the internet and such, we still find trouble easily remembering who was vice president or president in what year, etc. And we have the great historian Sir Ronald Syme, and he argues this was the mix-up of the two events that I spoke about. The next major issue I'm going to be going over is the issue of contradictions, right? The Gospels contain major contradictions in the narratives. A few examples are the nativity accounts where Matthew and Luke claim opposing stories about Mary and Joseph's travels. So essentially, in Luke's story, Luke argues that they start off in Nazareth and they go to Bethlehem for the census, and after done with the census, 40 days after, they go to the temple in Jerusalem to do the ritual purification and they go back to Nazareth. In that time period, there's no time for them to travel to Egypt, as Matthew claims with the massacre of Herod, that they start in Bethlehem, and then Herod orders a massacre, and then they go to Egypt to flee, and then they end up going to Nazareth after being warned in a dream. These two narratives can't happen at the same time because Luke has the narrative strictly chronological of going to the census, then going to the temple, and then going back home to Nazareth. That's one contradiction. The next contradiction I'm going to be talking about is the resurrection accounts. For example, Matthew says that the disciples were told to go to Galilee. So if you look in the gospel accounts in Matthew 27, I believe it is, or Matthew 28, when Jesus is resurrected, the angels tell the women to tell the disciples to go to Galilee, and Jesus is waiting for you there. Then they meet Jesus as well, and Jesus affirms to them to go to Galilee, and they do end up meeting him in Galilee later at the end of the chapter. However, in Luke, Luke has Jesus meeting the disciples on the first day of the resurrection, and he tells them to stay in Jerusalem, and then he ascends in that same chronological timeline. And these, accounts can't fit at all. And this again goes along with the whole idea of theological bias of the authors. For example, scholars argue that Luke was basically trying to remove all the Galilean accounts regarding the resurrection and wanted to keep things strictly in Jerusalem, and he wanted Jerusalem to be the central hub of Christianity in his narrative, and he continues that narrative in Acts. So this contradiction can't be reconciled, and I'd like to see Cozz to try and reconcile this contradiction, which we won't be able to. Another contradiction is going to go to the miracle accounts, where Jairus' daughter, so Jairus is a guy that comes up to Jesus and tells him, oh, my daughter is ill, or my daughter is dead, and I need you to resurrect her or heal her. The issue is, in Mark and Luke, he comes and tells her that my daughter is ill, okay, not that she's actually dead, and tells Jesus to come and heal her. And then later on, someone comes and tells Jairus, oh, your daughter fully died. In Matthew's account, when Jairus goes to Jesus, he straight away tells him that he's dead, that his daughter is dead, which these two gospel accounts can't be reconciled, and this is a demonstration of contradictions in the miracle accounts, contradiction in the nativity accounts, contradiction in the resurrection accounts. I can even get into contradiction in the crucifixion accounts. And again, I know Cozz is trying to say, oh, well, I'm not arguing for inerrancy, that's fine. But the issue is when multiple accounts are so contradictory on so many bases, on like when it comes to theology, when it comes to like the political events that were happening at the time, like the census. We start to question how reliable are these sources really are, you know? Um, so he's the contradiction of Matthew and Luke, right? And he's also like basically apologists trying to answer it. Christian apologists like to try and reconcile the contradiction of the nativity accounts by saying Jesus was born, and then Jesus presented at the temple. Then Luke skips ahead in Luke 2:39, and then the wise men visit Jesus, and then the flight to Egypt happens. But this can't work because one, you have to invent a trip from Jerusalem back to Bethlehem, which doesn't exist in the story. Issue two, according to Luke, Nazareth was their home, so why would they go back to Bethlehem after they are done in the temple? Issue three, assuming this time gap in Luke makes Luke to be a negligent historian and goes against basic storytelling principles. Other issues are like genealogies. Abdul, how much time do I have left? I want to see if how much I want to go over my opening statement.
You have exactly 8 minutes.
8 minutes, no problem. I'll go over genealogies too. So Luke's genealogy severely contradicts Matthew's genealogy. The following image represents the commonalities between the two genealogies and the discrepancies. So these discrepancies show that Matthew and Luke were using completely different sources for their genealogies or making them up. And we're more inclined to believe they were making them up because, again, the same thing that Cozz said, which would impede on historical reliability, is theological bias. Matthew and Luke had theological bias in constructing their genealogies. They wanted Jesus to be a descendant of David. They wanted the genealogies to fit a certain amount of numbers because of their numerology, which is something also scholars argue for, like Raymond Brown in his book Birth of the Messiah, a Catholic scholar, by the way. Um, and these can't be reconciled, and there's been many apologists trying to reconcile this in history. Christians, since the beginning of time, have tried to reconcile these differences using different copes. The first attempt we know is by the likes of Julius Africanus, claiming that the discrepancies are due to the Levitical legal marriage system. This only explains a few and is also not mentioned by the text. So it mentions here, this is also from Raymond Brown's book, I believe, or from Giza Vermes, sorry. And another more common cope is that Luke's 1 is meant for Mary, but this is not mentioned anywhere in the text. That is clearly Joseph's genealogy. So one of the copes Christians try to give is say, oh, well, look, Luke is giving Mary's genealogy and Matthew's giving Joseph's genealogy, so they're different. But Luke mentions that nowhere, and the genealogies clearly contradict. One of the last points I'm going to be going over is creative freedom of ancient biographies. So this is funny because Cozz himself was just arguing, oh, the Gospels fit into the category of ancient biography, which is just like copy pasting an argument from an inspiring philosophy video, not knowing that the same scholars he quote go against him in this topic, and the fact that ancient biographies don't tend to actually account to the same level of historical reliability that Christians rely on the Gospels for. Yes, a lot of historians use ancient sources and consider them reliable to a certain extent, but again, that's going to be difference between the Gospels and those sources. For example, you mentioned things about Alexander the Great, even though we have actual eyewitness sources from Alexander the Great, we don't have that for the Gospels. And I'd like to see you actually try and tackle the idea that the Gospels are not eyewitness sources. But regarding ancient biography, he's from Hanson's The Invented and the Invented Eyewitness. He says the fraudulent eyewitness tradition is likewise attested in many different literary traditions, including among ancient bioi. Perhaps one of the most infamous examples is, Damas was supposedly a companion of Apollonius of Tyana, and Damas originally compiled tablets which documented various episodes of Apollonius's life, which Damas witnessed, were passed down to Julius Domno and then to Philostratus himself. I don't know how to pronounce these names, but however, there is a problem with this, which is that we have absolutely no attestation of Damas or these materials outside of Philostratus' work, right? So this is one example of like how ancient biographies also like mix fact and fiction. Um, He's also Andrew Lincoln, The Gospel According to St. John, in Black's New Testament commentary, argues we have noted that ancient biography had links with ancient historiography. In ancient biography, there was even less of a distinction between what we would call factual and fictional elements. Okay? So, and we can go over many examples of how even eyewitness accounts in medieval times or in antiquity or early, late antiquity, also, mix fact and fiction in their accounts, and how the Gospels differ from the actual sources that we use to rely on to reconstruct Roman Palestine in the first century. Um, so that his whole point of how the Gospels fall into like ancient biography falls flat against him because the Gospel authors are clearly theologically motivated. They don't try to give a full historical account. They insert their own theology into their narratives to try and weave, what they believe about Jesus, about his descent, about their Christology, etc. And regarding creative freedom of ancient biographies, I want to go over how the Gospel authors do it themselves. So one of the arguments I'm going to be giving is that the gospel authors basically they try to insert dialogue into the mouths of people that they would have no access to. If I was an eyewitness to an account or an eyewitness to a story, I could only account the things that I heard or actually have sources of information on. However, the gospel authors recount events and recount information that they had no access to. For example, How did John, the author of the Gospel of John, know about the private conversation between Pilate and Jesus in John 18? How did Matthew know that Herod was secretly assembling the wise men? Did Herod the Great, before he died, go like to Matthew while he was a kid and tell him, "Yo, yo, this is what I did," like to the wise men and stuff like that? This is ridiculous. How did Luke know about Herod's personal thoughts and desires? Luke 23:8 narrates what Herod was specifically thinking in his mind. Did Herod go and do a therapy session with Luke so Luke can record these thoughts and this dialogue? How did the evangelists know the words of Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane when they were asleep in Mark 14 and the other Gospels that narrate the prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane? It's explicitly stated that they started dozing off and not listening to what they're saying, to what Jesus was praying. And yet the Gospels narrate this explicitly with exact detail. This shows that they were using creative freedom and not actually narrating things with historical accuracy. Um, that's pretty much it. Or actually, I'll go over these two as well. So he also mentioned Richard Bolcom, and he talked about decent eyewitnesses and how names is a good test for historicity. You know how they mention the same name frequencies and stuff like this. However, this is known to be like an argument that's not really accepted in academia, um, unlike the likes of Richard Bolcom. This is an abstract from Camel Gregor's paper that he published, which is name's a good test for historicity. The abstract reads: In Decent Eyewitnesses, Richard Bolcom argues that the popularity of personal names in gospel acts corresponds remarkably well to name popularity among late ancient Palestinian Jews, and this can only be the case if Gospel Acts characters are in most cases historical as opposed to invented in the process of anonymous community transmission. We re examined Balkan's conclusions, asserted with a remarkably high level of confidence, but almost entirely without an actual statistical evaluation of his data, and performed the appropriate statistical analysis on the most recent data set. We show that Balkan's thesis
Mm.
offers no advantage in explaining the observed correspondence between name popularity in Gospel Acts and the contemporary Palestinian Jewish population over an alternative model of anonymous community transmission. Moreover, our statistical analysis identifies some, albeit weak, evidence against Balkan's thesis. So, how much time do I have left? Just to summarize a few things.
Less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes.
No problem, no problem. So just to summarize my points again, regarding historical reliability, Cozz made my point for me. I don't even have to make that point there. He put the standards of theological bias, what they're actually trying to narrate history. Is there actually multiple attestation? The Gospels are not multiply attested records. They're reliant on each other. Mark, Matthew, and Luke, we have the synoptic problem. We know Luke, Mark, and Matthew have an interdependent relationship, and also we know John is relying on the synoptics for arguments I can make later on if you want to contest that, because that's actually the position the majority of scholars are in today and moving in towards the direction of today. When it comes to, again, theological bias, John has extreme theological bias in his narratives. We have the Doubting Thomas story, which is not even original to the story because it's a redaction of the later author. And the many theological biases I mentioned with Descent of David with Luke and Matthew, and other theological biases of Mark, for example, when he tries to, do the literary convention of mimesis and posit his whole story and fit his own like literary devices. Um, so that's for historical reliability. And for who wrote the Gospels, again, I can argue that these Gospels are anonymous. They were circulating anonymously. They were spoken of anonymously. The titles didn't exist until later on. The attestation for the Gospels don't come until later, until Irenaeus, and later on in the second and third century from the Muratorian fragment, Irenaeus of Lyon. So I'll be arguing for anonymity and lack of eyewitness sources there. And also, again, the major ahistorical claims. I'd like to see him defend the massacre of Herod. I'd like to see him defend the census of Luke. If he doesn't do these things, he'll be conceding that major narratives of the Gospels are completely ahistorical. Another thing I can even mention is the resurrection of the saints in Matthew, which I wasn't going to go over, but I might as well. Matthew claims in the end of his gospel that when Jesus basically was crucified and resurrected, a whole group of saints resurrected from the dead and started walking around like zombies, and many people witnessed this, yet no one records this in history. No other gospel records
That is
this,
time.
no other Roman source records this, Um, yeah, if that's the time, I'll
Yeah,
just
that is
basically, that's
time.
pretty much no problem, all right. So yeah, anyways, I just want
Yeah.
him to basically actually address any of the arguments I made and specifically tackle the specific ahistorical claims that I made for that. So yeah.
All right, we'll see this in the rebuttals. Quickly, for anybody watching, you can ask questions in the Gospel Discussions channel, and they will be
Yeah,
read
exactly.
aloud for the Q&A sections. Um, yeah, thank you guys for your opening statements. We will be moving on to the next round of 10-minute rebuttals, starting with Cozz. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So the first mention of Richard Bauckham, you read the actual first paragraph, which you're quoting here. He speaks on the fact that scholars differ widely as to how conservative or creative the tradition was. In the same sentence, he says, no doubt, well, actually, previous sentence, he says, no doubt the eyewitnesses started the process of oral tradition, but it passed through many, obviously, retellings, reformulations, expansions before the evangelists themselves did their own editorial work on it. The sentence after this says it would be misleading to suggest that this view of transmission of Jesus traditions in the early church necessarily leads to historical skepticism about the reliability of the gospel accounts of Jesus. The context that he's actually speaking of in this chapter is referring to early form critics, as he actually elaborates in the next few pages. It is a curious fact that nearly all the contentions of the early form critics have by now been convincingly refuted, but the general picture of the process of oral tradition that the form critics pioneered still governs the way most New Testament scholars think. So, when he establishes that with this, the argument there that doesn't prove anything related to actual alteration of the oral tradition, since early form criticism hypothesized with the Q source that the gospel oral tradition had been altered over time, and then, of course, had its own version afterwards, as you said, Irenaeus. But there's no evidence to suggest this at all, besides, early form critics, and these were usually refuted already, as Richard Bauckham has explained. So with this, he also critiques the positions of Rudolf Bultmann, Birger Gerhardsen, and Kenneth Bailey on this as well, and the fact that they were using folklore criteria in order to actually justify what they were saying, and inevitably they were actually contradicting a lot of things that happened in history. Um, to clarify, of course, also is the certain historical events that happened earlier in the Gospels are usually appealed to in tradition rather than argued heavily by scholars to affirm the historicity of it. For example, the crucifixion, majority of scholars concede that it is historical fact and it's not illusory or something that happened and it was just a decoy. The earlier facts, there's no problem in saying that something must be hypothesized on. Saying that it's not attested for doesn't mean it's not true, or the fact that someone, for example, contests it as to be evaluated first and you haven't demonstrated that. The next part is the fact that with the next books you stated with Bart Ehrman, he himself, when he's actually articulating his claims, other scholars, including Bauckham and Craig Evans, argue heavily against him the fact that he's appealing to extremely speculative claims and the fact that his own arguments fall on their own standards. So, with even the comparisons to Plutarch and other things like that, the theological bias also. Being descendant from a bunch of people is not a theological bias. Theological bias has to do with the actual Judaic beliefs that they had, and messianic beliefs are somewhat related to that, but not necessarily the nature of what is pertained to the theos. So, with this, and continuing on to the other quotations you made, um, a lot of the things you stated about like certain contradictions, a lot of them aren't actually contradictions. They're still being hypothesized, but at the same time, with let's just say what was that one? What was slide 3? Can you present slide 3? Yeah, are you
About
able
what
to
specifically?
slide? Just show slide 3. I just need to see the content in it.
Sure, sure, no
Thank you.
problem.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what do the experts say? Okay, so yeah, this quote here already clarified it. Scholars generally agree that's not true at all because of the fact that actual scholars themselves, this is renamed by Richard Bachman and how he names about 4 different scholars who already coincide with his opinion on this, and the fact that early form criticism itself is the reason for why the oral tradition was hypothesized as being corrupted early on, and this is also a statement by Boltman. So could you go to the slide 4? For a minute. Outline to academic arguments for anonymity. Yeah, so the statements on the anonymity part, um, there's literally no problem again with saying that people who heard the apostles had written down what was said, and the contention behind oral tradition changing over time or like ahistorical claims, these themselves are only hypothesized by some scholars and not a general consensus on it. So when it comes to that, it itself cannot be used as a deductive or like argument true in reality. There's some things, yes, that are argued like the resurrection of people, but that itself we're not really focusing on it. I could like there's no reason to talk about it really. I mean, it's neither true nor false. Like nobody has actually said whether or not they hypothesize it's false, but there's still arguments being brought up about that. So yeah, the next slide, by the way. Yeah, next slide. Okay,
We're
so the
going one by
massacre
one,
of
bro.
Herod. Yeah. I'm just trying to answer these things. The massacre of Herod itself. Yeah, no, the thing that I explained before, something not being attested for doesn't mean it's not true. This is would be the logical fallacy of absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Now, I'm not using this to obviously prove anything, regardless, but this is earlier in the Gospels. The genealogies themselves, along with this, do not prove like complete inerrancy. I mean, complete errancy. There's things that are hypothesized according to tradition rather than always argued historically. So using this to disprove the historical reliability of the Gospels would not be sufficient. The next slide, of course, you were mentioning the ahistorical claims. Uh, yeah, the Lucan census as well. Oh man, I can't
You
zoom
have
in
about
onto
two
this.
minutes.
Yeah. I'm trying to zoom in on this. I can't zoom in because I see the profiles. Wait, can I get the arrow here? Oh, whatever. I'll just try to look closely. It says that Caesar Augustus, the emperor of Rome, issued a uh, worldwide census where everyone had to. What's the word there? Because I can't read it in the bad quality. Hold on, I'm gonna use the arrow here.
An
What was the
empire-wide
word?
census where everyone had to return to their ancestral hometowns. Caesar Augustus.
Yeah, no. The next sentence there.
Meaning you must return to the hometown of your ancestors. Luke says Joseph must return to Bethlehem, the city of his ancestor David. I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but
You know, how does that relate to the dream that he received?
well, finish your rebuttal, then I'll tell you my rebuttal, bro.
Okay. Um, I won't do the rest.
All right, so you done or?
You can chop. Yep, you can chop off the rest of the time.
All right, no problem, no problem. All right, I'll just jump straight into it when you're ready, Abdul. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Go.
all right. I don't know what kind of rebuttal is that. I got to be honest with you. But look, first of all, he brought up the Richard Bolcom quote. Again, he's saying, oh, well, all these issues have been resolved that Richard Bolcom is talking about. Again, that's not the point. Obviously, Richard Bolcom is arguing that for the, against the scholarship. But the point is that it goes against all scholarship in this modern time period, right? And these arguments that these scholars hold to are still held to today and argued for strongly, and they're becoming stronger and stronger every day. Um, Regarding to Alan for academic arguments for anonymity, I'm not sure what you were talking about regarding consensus, but these arguments I provided are the consensus of academics. The consensus of academics that church attestation to authorship is unreliable, right? Profiles of the authors are not consistent. These are all academic consensuses on these issues. Okay. Regarding the massacre of Herod, I want everyone to listen carefully. He said this is a fallacious argument of argument from silence. No, it's not, right? An argument from silence, if you actually understand logic correctly, it's not that, oh, just that, oh, if you something is not mentioned and therefore you can't make that as an argument. There's something called an expectation of knowledge, expectation of evidence, right? For example, cause if I came and told you that just now, the whole politics server got nuked or whatever it is, and oh, there was some kind of major event, or there was an asteroid that hit your country, and you go on your phone and you check on Twitter, and then no one mentioned this asteroid, no one mentioned this meteor that hit the United States, or no one mentioned a meteor that hit the world. Then I come and tell you, well, that's fine, that's an argument from silence. It still could have happened. Just because no one said it didn't happen or said it did happen doesn't mean it didn't happen. No, there's an expectation of evidence. When a meteor hits the United States, we expect everyone to be tweeting about it within 5 minutes, right? So the same thing with the massacre of Herod. That's why I specifically argued that we have sources that detail in a detailed manner document what Herod did. I told you Josephus had direct access to Nicholas of Damascus's writings, who was basically Herod's direct secretary, and he goes on to mention Herod's atrocities. Josephus hated Herod, and he mentions all the bad things he did, yet he doesn't mention this one. This shows that this massacre wasn't something that's known to not have happened. How can we believe that Herod massacred a whole vicinity of Judea and no one knows about this happening except Matthew, who's writing approximately what, like 70 years later from this event, 80 years later from this event, because Jesus would have been born around 5 to 6 BC. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how an argument from silence works. Regarding the Lucan census, I mean, he didn't really say much about this, but again, the point Luke makes several ahistorical claims. And how can a empire-wide census occur that never happened in Roman history? And how can a client kingdom be taxed or made a census of? Are you aware of this fact that client kingdoms, Herod's kingdom, Judea, was a client kingdom within the Roman Empire, meaning that Caesar Augustus wouldn't have imposed a tax or a census upon it. Okay, and same thing with when it comes to the dating, right? You haven't addressed the dating at all. You haven't addressed the fact that Luke says this census happened during the time of Herod the Great and while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Look at the timeline here. Herod died in 4 BC, while Quirinius became governor in 6 CE. This is direct ahistorical like a historical claim. And in fact, we know why Luke is making this claim because of Luke being an unreliable historian and relying on sources and not actually understanding them. Because Luke was relying on Josephus and mixing up events of different rebellions, as I showed from Sir Ronald Symes is in his book talking about this. Okay, so he hasn't addressed any of this at all. Also, he said, "Oh, ancestry and genealogy is not a theological bias." What are you talking about? It's one of the biggest theological biases in gospel in New Testament studies that's known about. It's the consensus of scholars that Matthew and Luke had a theological bias in constructing their narratives regarding the ancestry of Jesus. The facts are simple. There's basically at that time when we at the time of first century Judea, there was expectation of the Messiah to be born in Bethlehem. This is taken from Micah 5 and other places, and we can attest to this in sources from like the Targums of Jonathan. Giza Vermes talks about this in his book, Nativity, Passion, and Resurrection. And there was this expectation that was already there. So when Matthew and Luke are writing their narratives, they want Jesus to be born in Bethlehem. They want him to be descended from David. These are theological biases and they directly contribute to their construction of the narrative. Matthew's Jesus as a Moses parallel directly contributes to his narrative. All these theological biases are coming into play to construct these narratives, and they do these narratives in different ways, which is why they contradict, which is why they're different. These are direct theological biases that, and again, I'm going to repeat, theological biases. The reason why I'm repeating this is because you yourself put that as a criteria, one of the criteria for historicity. You said, oh, if they don't have theological bias, if they're multiple attestation, well, where's the multiple attestation for the massacre of Herod? Where's the multiple attestation for the Lucan census? Look at the theological bias regarding Matthew and Luke in regard to the nativity accounts. These, like the Gospels, fail and fail and fail at the same criteria that you put in your opening statement. Okay? What else did you mention? Oh, you were talking about how, guys, I want you to remember how in the opening statement you said, oh, we have these other sources, they date late and everything. Plutarch and Alexander, the sources about Alexander from Plutarch and other places. Well, that's just different, like completely different situation in the Gospels. First of all, the Gospels are anonymous sources. They don't say who they got their sources from. They don't name any sources. The difference between that and Plutarch and other Greco-Roman sources at that time is that they mentioned the direct sources that they had access to. They had access to direct eyewitness sources. They had access to like senatorial archives. They had direct access to like Alexander's like advisors and stuff. And I can show you sources for this if you like. So that's completely different than the Gospels. Just because a source comes late doesn't mean it's ahistorical. We already know this, but the point is, what sources do they claim to come from? For example, Matthew and Mark don't claim to have any eyewitness sources at all. Let me show you, for example, 1 second. I want to show everyone how many sources at that time claim eyewitness testimony, whether they do have eyewitness testimony or not, and how the Gospels don't. Let's look at this for a second here. Let me bring this up here. I'm not streaming my screen, am I? Let me stream my screen. Is it streaming now? All right, here.
Yeah, we see you.
Yeah, you're
Okay,
good.
good.
You're good.
No problem here. Greco-Roman historical biographies that mention eyewitness access, right? Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, right? And I don't even know how to pronounce most of these names, but literally, these are all sets of sources that mention eyewitness access when they believe they had access to it. Mark and Matthew have an unprecedented in how they mention no eyewitness accounts or anything like that. So this is like completely going against your criteria that you mentioned. Like, oh, these late sources, they don't have access to, it's much later than the Gospels in comparison to Jesus. But again, these are completely different situations. It's about the sources that they had. That's how historians conduct history. Okay. Um, what else needs to be gone over? I mean, you didn't even say much in your rebuttal. In regards to genealogy, you didn't address the contradictions. Oh, and also a couple things I just want to mention. One, basically, Cozz conceded just earlier that, oh, it's fine that we argue that the Gospels are anonymous. I want every Christian in this VC or in this stage, like, are you okay with that? Are you okay with Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John not actually being eyewitness accounts? Are you okay with Luke not being a companion to Paul? Are you okay with Matthew not being the Matthew the tax collector? Are you okay with Mark not being the interpreter of Peter? Are you okay with John not being John, son of Zebedee, the author of the Gospel of John? Because Cozz is saying it doesn't matter. Well, I say it matters, and the Christians say it matters, and the academics say it matters. But Cozz wants to say, oh, it doesn't matter. It perfectly matters whether you're an eyewitness or not, whether you had access to eyewitness sources or not, is like perfectly important into this topic of whether they're historically reliable. And again, he also didn't address any of the contradictions. He didn't address the nativity contradictions. He didn't address the Jairus' daughter contradiction. He didn't address the resurrection contradictions. He didn't address anything I said pretty much. Especially the Luke consensus. I'm going to press him real hard on this because there's so many issues with Luke's census. It's one of the biggest ahistorical narratives in all the Gospels. That the academics, it's just laughable to the academics that this even occurred. Um, there's not much else to say because again, he just didn't even address any of what I said pretty much. But again, I'm gonna just emphasize. I'm gonna use this time to emphasize what I want him to address and what I'm gonna press him on the cross exam.
Yes,
Right? Can you address these contradictions and can you address the issues of anonymity and can you address the issue of the major ahistorical claims? Okay, that's pretty much what there is to say. So cross exam getting soon.
So what's next?
Cross exam.
Oh, all right.
Cross exam?
Okay.
That was lovely.
Basically an open
Again,
discussion,
you guys
but you
can
get to
go.
ask the questions, right? It's open discussion, but Cos gets to ask the questions because it's his turn, right?
Oh, only me? Well, why can't you we both?
Because that's I have cross exam after. It's
Oh, okay,
15
okay.
minutes. 15 minutes. We can do 10 minutes. Doesn't matter. Whatever
Oh,
works.
okay, no
When you're
worries, no
done, you're
worries.
done. Let me know. When you're
So I
done
just
asking
asked
your
questions.
questions.
That's pretty much was established.
Yeah, press me if you're able to.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, cross
Um,
exams. You just ask the question, and he can,
okay,
and the
great.
only questions that he can ask in return are just clarifying questions that he has to
Bro,
answer.
I thought you
Okay,
prepared, bro.
Um,
okay, great, great,
yeah,
great.
15 minutes, 15 minutes starting whenever you're ready. Go ahead.
Okay. So when I talked about the Richard Bauckham and the fact of modern scholarship, do you know exactly what context he's speaking of in this?
Yeah, speaking of regarding like the form criticism of like scholars and like that was developed over like the last couple of centuries, but it's again it's doesn't matter because regardless of whether he's speaking of the development of these form critics, these same arguments are held to by modern critics today. The arguments that Raymond Brown made 60, 70 years ago are still held today by the likes of Bart Ehrman and other like historical critics of the Bible. So whatever context you want to bring in, it's just going to support me more.
Okay. So you talked about how it form criticism has existed for centuries. Do you know the difference between classic and modern form criticism?
Well, specifically, I don't know what specifics you're asking for, but what I can tell you is the form
To
criticism from
define
like
early form
classic,
criticism versus modern.
classic form criticism wasn't as robust. They didn't have like the same like historical tools that we have access to today. And the modern form criticism is basically much stronger. But I don't know what specifics you want me to tackle or what differences.
No, define it.
I mean,
Define
define
the
it.
two. Yeah, define the two,
I mean,
if you could.
again, form criticism is just they're both going to have the same definition, except that one is going to be less robust with different methodologies. So again, like, what exactly do you want to like get you a Google
You
definition of form
haven't defined
criticism?
it.
Is that what you want?
Define what? Yes, define what form criticism is. Yes, early versus modern.
Okay, no, okay, no problem. We'll get you a Google definition of what form criticism is. No problem.
No, no, no. Your definition.
Yeah, so form
You
criticism, since you're
googling.
asking for a definition,
Okay, never
yeah,
mind.
you asked for a definition of form criticism. So form
But
criticism
no, well, I thought you
as a
would
method
know
of
about this
biblical
if you were using
criticism.
Richard Bauckham for
I
this.
know I know what form criticism is, but you're asking for a
If you
specific
know what it is,
definition.
then you
So
gotta say the
is
definition.
again, yeah, I'm giving you the definition. It's a method of biblical criticism, classifies units of
So
scriptures
Richard.
according to
Oh, never mind.
Wikipedia, classifies units of scripture by literary pattern, and then attempts to trace each type of its period to oral transmission. Right. In other
Yeah,
words,
or
form
transmission.
criticism is the endeavor to get behind the written sources of the Bible to the period of oral tradition, isolate the oral forms that went into written sources. Like I understand it's
Yeah,
about like the sources that they are quoting from and like whether it which ones are oral, which ones are written. It's this is also in relation to the synoptic problem and how like whether it's like Matthew and Luke are relying on Mark or whether John's relying on Matthew, Luke, and Mark in the synoptics. These all play into form criticism. But again, what's your point? You're asking, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? What's the classical definition of this? And the modern definition of this is not going to help your argument in any way, shape, or form. If you're just going
I'm
to
asking
dwell on this
questions.
Richard
I don't
Bauckham
think we're in
quote,
an argument part here.
well, I'm answering your question and showing you why it's irrelevant,
Yeah,
right?
you were
But
answering
yeah,
it.
like if you
You
want to,
can't go back to me though. I'm asking questions. Okay, so
all right, I mean, I
when it
answered you. Go
comes to the
ahead.
definition of form criticism, so classic and or modern form criticism are distinguished in their purposes and the actual the fact that the usage and the criterion that they're using, the standard. So they use usually the same standard sometimes, but they're actually based on actual different analogies in how they actually argue against it. They still establish the Q hypothesis and the fact that they use that, but the difference is they redefine what the purpose of the Q hypothesis is, and the fact that the early form critics like Boltzmann, when they were using the Q hypothesis, they were establishing that the alteration of the gospel tradition had changed over time for decades and was not monitored at all. It was uncontrolled, and there was no communities that were actually establishing this. Do you have any arguments from Richard Buckman that actually supports that?
That supports what exactly? Again, all I quoted
Supports the
Richard
fact
Balkan
that
for, the only point that I quoted Richard Balkan for was to show that even
Mhm,
he, in his book Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, attests to that his arguments in Jesus and the
mhm.
Eyewitnesses runs counter to almost all recent scholarship. It's in context of authorship and anonymity. I don't know what you're trying to get to here, but just the point is that Richard Balkan is in the minority here in what he's arguing that the gospel accounts are close to eyewitness sources and close to eyewitness accounts themselves. That's all I'm saying. It's not deeper than that. Obviously, I disagree with Richard Balkan, and most scholars do as well, in regards to his name frequencies, in regards to his other arguments that he makes, and we can go over them if you like.
Do you know the date of the book Jesus and the Eyewitnesses?
Yeah, it's I believe it's around I don't remember. I think it's around 25, 20, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 to 30 years ago. It should be in the 90s, I believe. But your point?
90s? 2006. So, do you think that obviously these positions would be redefined or refined over time and wouldn't keep the same position in 2006?
Which is why, actually, no, they haven't been changed. Which is why I gave multiple quotations from the New Oxford Annotated Bible. I gave from Bart Ehrman's book Forged. I gave multiple sources, and these same consensuses are still held. I can give you 100. I can literally pull up like 10 different quotes right now about the consensus of scholars on anonymity of the Gospels that have remained the case. The critical, basically, endeavor unto the Gospels is the same, if not even more critical than it was 20 years ago. The books I quoted are from I've given modern
Could I
quotations and like
respond to
earlier
the other
quotations.
other part?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the statement here, in the criticisms of form criticism, in page 246, when we are reading actual Baucham's description of Boltzmann and other scholars' actual descriptions of the Q hypothesis and how the oral tradition works, he says in the first sentence, virtually every element in this construction has been questioned and rejected by some or even most scholars. Many of these criticisms are rooted in much better and fuller information that is now available about the way oral traditions operate in predominantly oral societies. Boltzmann's assumptions that traditions originate in pure form is highly questionable. There is no reason why they should have existed from the beginning in modified or mixed forms. The fact that so few of the gospel pericopes actually conform to the ideal types postulated by the form critics indicate that a more nuanced approach to form is requisite. And he also gives a critique on Sitt's sits im Leben, which is obviously a German term, and it's basically just referring to actually set in life, or yeah, no, it'd be referring to that. So with this, what I'm questioning is if you're going to use Richard Bachman or Richard Bauckham and other scholars to affirm this position, Richard Bauckham himself establishes that most scholars and also the arguments that early form critics that which actually question the oral tradition and the established consensus of the gospels, no matter if they're anonymous or not, is the fact that the oral tradition was maintained and controlled. Therefore, the things that were
Cause,
said
cause, cause,
couldn't have been altered.
cause. Again, the
Sure, what's
point
up?
of the Richard Balkan quote is to show that most scholars disagree against his position. I'm not obviously Richard Balkan is saying, well, hey, these arguments have been addressed and I'm going to address them in his book. But my point is that his arguments run counter to almost all recent scholarship. And again, there's modern books too that say the same thing. Do you think gospel like the criticism of the gospels have changed like drastically in the last 10, 15 years? No, which is why I have more books. For example, Jesus Before the Gospels by Bart Ehrman. He argues the same thing that Balkan is critiquing, that hey, the oral tradition was heavily confused, was heavily like distorted between the time of Jesus' actual event and the Gospels being written in Jesus Before the Gospels by Bart Ehrman, which was written in 2017. There's many modern papers on this too. I don't know what you're trying to argue, but again, my point is that the majority of scholars are against this idea of Richard Balcom arguing that Jesus, like eyewitness accounts and these eyewitness accounts and close to eyewitness accounts and the oral tradition is barely distorted at all. Like, I don't know what's your point here. You have to actually address the points of the actual debate and not argue about what Richard Balcom says. The point of what Richard Balcom is saying is that it's against most scholarship. That's all that's being said. It's very clear. Again, I'm not even obviously I disagree with Richard Balcom. Like your point is just completely frivolous.
Okay, so now the next point is about Bart Ehrman. So one, his points have been refuted by most contemporary scholars on his points with
Which points?
oral tradition and the authorship. Oh, sure. This it should be. Let's see. Make sure I get the title here correctly. Okay, so need to make
Because
sure I get this
Bartman's
one.
arguments represent the mainstream standard scholarly views regarding the Gospels, and he's
They
published works
actually
in
do
recent
not.
history. Okay, sure, you can go and
So,
show evidence of this.
Craig A. Evans, in the author of Jesus and the Ossuaries, and also his uh, authorship of Fabricating Jesus: How Modern Scholars Distort the Gospels, he also explains that in this book that Bart Ehrman's own contentions with these arguments or these actual these things in history are based on speculation rather than actual grounded evidence. So, do you have any proposition for that or counter?
Yeah, so you have one guy critiquing another one guy.
Hmm.
My point again is that the consensus of scholars is for anonymity, for form criticism that heavily shows that the Gospels contain mixes of fact and fiction. Do you want to actually get into the evidence, or do you just want to keep saying like, oh, Bart Ehrman has got refuted, Bart Ehrman got refuted? Can you actually address Bart Ehrman's arguments in form criticism? Can you address his arguments in Jesus before the Gospels? Can you address his arguments that they wrote in Forge? Can you address the New Oxford Annotated Bible, right, and what it says about the general agreements of scholars regarding the not representing eyewitness testimony or contemporary accounts? Can you actually address the arguments regarding the historicity? Can you address the arguments regarding the fact that, like I said, the the differences between the sources that you quoted actually have access to eyewitness accounts regarding Alexander and Plutarch writing about him and these kind of things, when the Gospels don't mention any eyewitness accounts, especially Mark and Matthew. So what's your like rebuttal to this? You have not presented any rebuttal to this. All you're saying is, oh well, this guy Craig Evans critiques Bart Ehrman. Well, yeah, obviously there's going to be some scholars that critique Bart Ehrman. Like, what's your point?
I can
The
respond if
point
you
is that
wish,
the
but
consensus of scholars, the point of the consensus of scholars is against the points that you are making. But again, this is your time. Ask whatever question you need to ask and ask any substantial questions because so far they haven't been substantial, unfortunately.
okay. So with the consensus from Bart Ehrman, you're concluding there's a consensus from Bart Ehrman. Could you show all the consensus from all scholars
Show all the consensus from all scholars. What does that mean? You mean you want me to quote each individual scholar
with their statement?
in
Yes.
in See, wait. Do you know how consensuses work? So, guys, this guy's asking me to quote every single scholar to show that there's a consent. That's not how consensuses work. Consensuses are made based on scholars making analyses of other scholars and then making a metadata analysis of these, which is what I'm doing right now. Which is why I
Can you name
quoted
the other
Richard
scholars
Bolcom.
besides Bart Ehrman
Richard Bolcom. I can bring you many scholars if you want. Here, I'll give you multiple.
and state their
I'll give
opinions?
I'll give you another two here. Not even just their opinions. I'm gonna show you what they say about the rest of scholarship, right? Yeah,
Please go ahead.
no problem. Yeah,
Okay,
he's,
let's
for
go
example, from
to
another scholar.
sources.
He's from Mark Pearson, who's a professor of theology and philosophy at Concordia University. He says the current consensus in the Academy of New Testament Scholars suggests that only those who shut their eyes and ears to the facts can maintain traditional beliefs about Jesus. Let me post that. Let me post that screenshot. Let me post that quote in
Yeah,
the
put in the
sources
sources.
channel. I want everyone to take note of this, right? 1 second. Where is it, bro? Where is it, bro? Look, he's from Mark Pearson. This is again modern works. You
Pearson.
kept saying, "Oh, well, that's too old."
Could you
Modern
quote
works.
the whole
The current
paragraph?
the current consensus in
Could
the
you quote the whole
Academy
paragraph?
of just one second. The current consensus in the Academy of New Testament Scholars suggests that only those who shut their eyes and ears to the facts can maintain traditional beliefs about Jesus. So this is again, and I can give you more quotations. Here's another quotation, right? He's from Gary Greenberg, biblical historian. Um, where is it? Here, he's from Gary Greenberg. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write the Gospels, says biblical historian Gary Greenberg in his latest book, Who Wrote the Gospels? Why New Testament scholars challenge church traditions, at least not the Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John tradition. He adds, controversial as his view is, he notes that it is widely accepted among New Testament scholars, yet few members of the lay public know about this modern scholarly consensus, let alone why scholars hold to this. Again, modern. Not this, oh, when was this written? It was written 20 years ago, so it doesn't count. The argument that the Gospels are anonymous has been the case for decades, and it still is the current consensus. And I give you more quotations like this is just the well-known, anyone who studied like form criticism or anything about gospel anonymity knows this is the consensus. Even the own arguments you were quoting from, which you were quoting from like arguments and you're going copying off a video from Inspiring Philosophy, even Inspiring Philosophy knows that the current consensus of academia is that the gospels are anonymous and we're circulating anonymously. This is just a basic fact to accept. Look, cause you can argue that, hey, I don't agree with this consensus and I want to go against it and I want to argue against it, even though you haven't shown any arguments against it. But that is a fact that this is the consensus. Do 5 minutes of research into
So,
gospel anonymity consensus.
with Richard Buckham and also it's Richard Burridge also, when they talk about this, they say that the actual authorship is used as a guarantor rather than it doesn't have to require being from the person, but rather as a guarantor of the tradition coming from them. We have evidence plenty of that in the oral tradition in the Gospels, of the fact that we can see that either there's a
Can you provide
likelihood
that?
of it being written. Pardon?
Provide that. Can you provide the gospels are based on eyewitness testimony? What's the argument?
Sure. So the when it comes to the actual, I was already put in the slides, and I already put this in. The eyewitness testimony is coming from the fact that with this particular thing, I'm trying to actually demonstrate that either they were from the eyewitness testimony or they were from those who were lived with the eyewitnesses. And with this particular part, nobody can test that these actually did happen. In reality, many of these events, according to Roman actual biography of what happened, did happen, and many of these apostles either died for what they claim to have believed, which is recited in Tacitus' book, Annals, and also the fact that when it comes to the eyewitnesses themselves, there's no contested view of the fact that Jesus, what I'm focusing on right now, is the death on the cross. The earlier parts of the Gospels, when it comes to the the Lucan consensus, as you said it, that itself doesn't provide anything against what I'm arguing. Anonymity doesn't necessarily say that something isn't historically factual. You can't say that anonymity literally automatically determines being non-historical.
Did I
For
say that?
example, you did. You
I
argued
didn't
that.
say that. What I said was no, I didn't argue that. What I said was these are anonymous sources, and the problem with them being anonymous isn't just that they're anonymous, because other Greco-Roman biographies sometimes speak in third person or don't speak in like a first person perspective or don't name themselves. That's fine. And we know that for a fact, right? Simon Gathercole in his paper talks about this, right? We know this. But the issue is them mentioning eyewitness sources, right? Especially Mark and Matthew. Mark and Matthew make no attempt at all. We can argue about John, the ending of John, the beginning of Luke, which I would disagree with that as well and argue against that. But Mark and Matthew, for example, Camel Gregor, New Testament scholar, argues that Mark and Matthew show complete lack of precedence if they had any access to eyewitness sources for them to mention them anyway. Greco-Roman biographies and Greco-Roman historians always mention access to eyewitness sources. Josephus, when he had access to sources, mentioned them. Plutarch, when he had access to sources, mentioned them, right? All these sources mentioned when they had access to sources, they would mention them. And I gave a list of sources right here. Where is it
Yeah,
again?
Luke does too,
Where, where again? No, no, he doesn't
and
mention who
John
the
does too,
sources are. No, 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 no. He
and
doesn't
John
mention
does
who
too.
the sources
Yes.
are.
Oh,
No, he doesn't. The John is actually different as well, because first of all, multiple points about John. One, the last chapter of John is widely considered to be a redaction and not written by the original author or written by in the original composition, which you even mentioned redactions in your original
That's
statement.
not evidence
Two,
against it.
two. Once no, there is evidence against it, because if
No,
it's a
that
later
wouldn't be
redaction, then we
because
can't.
I
One
just
second.
said once again.
well,
You
I,
asked
I
for
hate to
whether or
interrupt, but
not.
that's
Oh,
15
sorry.
minutes here.
Sorry, what?
So you guys can finish off.
I was
That's the
just gonna
15 minutes.
respond
You
in.
guys can finish off the thought.
You can
Oh, I
respond, no
apologize
problem.
for that.
Yeah, yeah.
15
Respond.
minutes.
No, that's fine. Respond whenever you want to respond. Go ahead. Respond
I
with
was
what you
gonna
need
say
to,
that
but
when
then
you were
I'm gonna
talking
ask my
about how
questions.
nobody in the actual writing actually names the sources, in John's Gospel, another person writing the source in which they're getting this
I said
information
Mark
from
and Matthew. I
is.
didn't say all of them. I said Mark and Matthew.
I
I
was
said
saying
10
Luke and
times
John.
Mark and Matthew. Yeah, I know, but I said Mark and Matthew don't mention any eyewitness testimony, and Luke and John and Luke doesn't mention specifically who, and John says beloved disciple, but the beloved disciple is widely considered to be disagreed upon who it is. For example, we have James Charlesworth arguing that it's actually Thomas, a disciple. We have other people arguing that's Mary Magdalene. We have people arguing that's a literary invention by the Gospel of John. We have, and we know the fact that the last chapter of John is basically like a later redaction. So there's multiple issues with that, and the fact that the Gospel of John himself basically differentiates themselves and the author from this eyewitness or this disciple himself. But yeah, that's the point.
Yeah,
So
once again, not
we can get
naming
into.
the sources doesn't make it impossible to be true. Even Plutarch doesn't name. himself
I'm not
or
arg-
even
Right.
the sources that he.
Plutarch does name his sources. Plutarch does name sources. But look, we'll get into my cross exam now. Okay, you asked your questions which were not really that
Yeah, yeah.
substantial. But I'll start my time now. Okay, let's just start heavy and straight to the point, right?
Yeah.
Do you understand what Luke's census claims that there was a client kingdom census that occurred in the time of Herod? And do you understand that this could not have occurred because of the fact that Romans did not impose censuses on client kingdoms and that was not how they operated? Do you want to see evidence of this?
Sure.
All right, here.
But I have to have the ability to read what you're reading as well.
What?
I have to have the ability to read what you're
You want
reading
me to
as well.
stream? I can't. Oh, because my camera's on, I can't stream, bro. All right, well, here. No problem. Here's, for example, Giza Vermes' book, Nativity, Passion, and Resurrection, written in, I believe, 2010. It says, so if there was no worldwide operation of any kind, was there at least a provincial census in the kingdom of Herod? The answer must once more be in the negative. Herod was a client king, a rex
Could
socius,
you say it
and the
slower
Romans
so I
did
can
not collect.
actually receive most of the information?
No problem. So, if there was no worldwide operation of any kind, was there at least a provincial census in the kingdom of Herod? The answer must once be in the negative. Herod was a client king, a rex socius, and the Romans did not collect taxes directly from the subjects of the rulers. The Judean kingdom was immune from Roman taxation for as long as Herod lived. This is found in antiquities. We have many other sources for this, and we know this to be the case. So, do you have any evidence that client kingdoms were actually taxed by Roman emperors when we know this is a ahistorical fact?
No, I'd have to demonstrate it to you later, after this.
Okay, no problem. So you can't provide any evidence for that right now. Okay, let's talk about Luke's misdating.
Currently, no, but I
Do
can
you
demonstrate to you
agree? Do you
afterwards.
agree? No problem. You can do that later on. What about
Yep,
Luke? When it comes to Luke claiming that this census occurred during both the time of Herod the Great and when Quirinius was governor of Syria, do you agree that Herod the Great was died in 4 BC?
I would have to do further
You know that
research
he,
on this.
well, again, it's basic fact. Everyone knows that Herod the Great died in 4 BC. Quirinius became governor in Syria in 6 CE. Luke says, and again, here's the timeline, okay? Herod dies in 4 BC.
Great.
Quirinius becomes governor in 6 CE. Luke says this census happened while both of them were ruling. How? This
Okay.
no, it doesn't make sense. It's a historical event. Do you concede that there's on the apparent right here there's no explanation for this and Luke just makes a historical claim?
I don't concede on this matter until I further research it.
All right, so basically you need to do further
I have to
research.
further
Okay,
research
no
to make
problem.
sure that I can establish that's actually true.
No problem. Do you agree that Josephus had access to direct sources from that directly come from Herod and his close advisor Nicholas of Damascus, and there's nothing recorded about the massacre of Herod in those sources?
Yeah, not recording it doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Okay. Do you know how an argument from silence works? When we have an expectation of evidence, there is an actual expectation of there to not be silence, an expectation of
Arguments
record. I
from
already told you the argument.
silence itself is the action of arguing from something without any evidence behind it.
Yeah,
That's why it's
again, but
argument from
there's something
silence.
called cause,
That's
cause,
not an
cause,
argument
cause,
from
cause,
silent me saying
cause,
that
cause,
someone didn't
cause,
say it is not true.
cause. I thought you were like some people told me you were good at philosophy or whatever it is or logic. An argument from
Okie dokie.
silence, okay, is only valid. An argument from silence is only valid when there's a lack of expectation. But here there is an expectation. And I ask everyone in the
I didn't say
chat.
it's an argument
Let's
from
say,
silence.
let's say, if there was a meteor that hit the United States, would you expect everyone to be talking about it on Twitter within 5 minutes?
Suspected I didn't say it was an argument from silence.
You didn't say it was an argument from silence.
Nor did I propose it.
You did like 10 times.
No, I
Are
didn't.
we dead ass?
When did
No,
I
you didn't.
say that it
Okay,
was an argument from silence?
you argued that me bringing up the massacre of Herod and Josephus not mentioning is an argument from silence. You said that in your rebuttal, and you said it 1 minute ago, 30 seconds ago. Everyone heard you, bro. Like, what the hell?
When did I say it was an argument from silence? I said that
Y-
not arguing for
who
not
brought up?
saying
Okay,
something
wait.
doesn't mean it didn't
Okay,
that it didn't
okay.
happen.
Who brought up an argument from silence in this debate?
I brought up an argument from silence on a particular matter, which of course I
Which was
don't remember at
this?
the moment,
Which
but
was this? It was this. Go back to the recording. It was I was talking about this. When I have my slides open, you were looking at the massacre of Herod, and you were talking about an argument from silence. It's literally this. Look, I'm not gonna waste any more
okay.
time. You clearly need to do more research on this. I'll go to the next point. Okay. Um,
Yeah, of course. We can have a
regarding
rematch after I do more
regarding
research on it,
contradictions,
so I can
no
finish it.
problem, no problem. Regarding contradictions. All right. Do you agree that Matthew and Luke are contradictory when Matthew says that they must head to Galilee and Luke says to them, stay in Jerusalem, the resurrection account in Matthew 28 and Luke 24?
Could be from different time frames, so I will not concede to that.
Can't be from different time frames because Luke specifically has this on the first day of the resurrection. I can read you the narrative from the beginning of Luke. They say when they were on the road traveling, when Jesus appears to them, then they meet with him and they eat fish with him. And that same conversation, he tells them to stay in Jerusalem. You want to read Luke together so you can concede on this? Let's read Luke together. It's happening on the same day, and in Matthew, it's happening on at the beginning too. Right?
Sure, if you
These are
like.
both initial appearances, right? For example, on Luke, he says on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, this was happening. All this, and the women saw the resurrection, all this kind of thing. And it says on that same day they were traveling, and then Jesus basically showed up to them. They didn't know it was Jesus. Then Jesus was speaking to them, and then guess what happened? They urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So it's the same day, still the same day. So they go home, eat dinner, and while they're eating, guess what? This Jesus starts speaking to them. Jesus appears to the disciples, and he starts telling them this, and that. Look, you can see the piercings of my hands and feet. And in that same conversation, what does he tell them? He says, "In this is what's written: the Messiah will suffer." Blah blah blah. You are witnesses of these things. I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from the Most High. The city of Jerusalem, obviously, and the power of the Most High is the Holy Spirit. We know this from Acts 1 and Acts 2 because they didn't receive the Holy Spirit until the day of Pentecost, and Jesus ascends to heaven then and there in the same chronology. In Matthew, they're told to go to Galilee, and they meet Jesus in Galilee. So the meeting in Galilee couldn't have happened before or after because in Luke they meet Jesus for the first time, and the first time they meet Jesus, he tells them to stay in Jerusalem. And guess what Acts 1 says? They stayed in Jerusalem until Jesus ascended to heaven.
Yeah, that can just be built off of oral tradition.
So a contradiction built off oral tradition.
That wouldn't be a contradiction.
It is a contradiction because
And
again,
I wouldn't
Luke
concede
says
to
they
it being a
stayed in
contradiction
Jerusalem.
until I fully research it.
Okay, okay,
Gotta
okay.
further research it.
Okay, then I'll show you. Does Act say that they stayed in Jerusalem or not?
No, once again, I'm gonna do further research on it before I concede
Okay,
anything.
okay, no
I'll
problem.
disagree
So
with
you
it
can't.
till I do further research on it. Then I'll tell you in DMs
So that's
possibly,
called.
or even wherever you are.
That's called no problem. No, that's just called like dogmatic bias, right? You don't want to concede to an argument giving you
That's
directly
not
because you want to
dogmatic
like.
bias.
It is, but look, it's fine. We'll go over the next thing.
If
What
something's
about the nativity
inconsistent,
accounts?
it's inconsistent. If something's inconsistent, it's consistent. Simple as that.
N- No
It's called
problem.
being
Okay, we'll go.
honest.
No problem. No problem. We'll go over the nativity accounts as well now. What about the nativity accounts? Do you agree that Luke has the story of them starting in Nazareth, okay, and then going to Bethlehem for the
Hmm.
census, and then 40 days after the census, they go back to Jerusalem, or they go to Jerusalem, sorry, to do the ritual purification, and then from Jerusalem, according to Luke 2:39, they go back to Nazareth, and they settle there. Do you agree this is the Lucan chronology?
Yeah, I could agree with Luke in
Okay,
chronology.
okay. So from when they were in Bethlehem, they had 40 days between then and going to Jerusalem. And right after Jerusalem, they go to Nazareth. So in what time did they have time to go to Egypt and run away from Herod in Matthew's story?
Not sure. You say.
I'll tell you, they didn't because this is a contradiction.
Okie dokie.
And they, again, okay, no problem. Next one.
I
Let's
would say
see.
also that one thing I was gonna clarify to the audience also is that my argument and the criterion behind it always focused on the fact that eyewitness testimony never suggests that it has to be harmonized verbatim word by word to each other. So
I didn't say that.
one account can have one detail that may not be the same as another, but it doesn't contradict in its entirety, since you're gonna have two different perspectives that still have the same thematic sentence. So once again, that wouldn't be a
Cause.
refutation.
This is not cause. This is not. Oh, are they verbatim agreeing or not? That's not what I'm arguing. The whole story is different. They could not have occurred. Logically, they can't happen at the same time or at the same area. Anything like that, they couldn't have happened. Luke has them go to Bethlehem, then go to Jerusalem 40 days after, as explicitly stated by Luke, and then Luke 2:39 explicitly states them going back to Nazareth. Matthew has them starting in Bethlehem, right? And this is another contradiction, by the way, because according to Luke, Joseph and Mary's hometown was Nazareth, and according to Matthew, their hometown was Bethlehem. And they go to Egypt to run away from Herod, and then they go back to Nazareth. Well, they wanted to go back to Judea, but they get warned by an angel, hey, you can't go back to Judea because Herod Archelaus took over after Herod the Great died, which was in 4 BC. and then they go back to Nazareth instead, and that's why he was called a Nazarene according to Matthew. And then he quotes a prophecy that doesn't exist. But we can get into that as well if you want to. So
Mhm.
this is not just, oh, they don't verbatim agree. I want to point this out to everyone. This is something Christian apologists always do. They're always like, oh, well, the Gospels emphasize different things and they focus on different things and they mention different details, but they don't necessarily contradict. No, I'm not talking about them saying things differently. I'm talking about explicit contradictions. They could not have occurred at the same time. Let's go over another example, right? The Jairus' daughter. Okay, where's Jairus' daughter? Um, where did the contradiction go? Here. Okay, in Mark and Luke, when Jairus goes to Jesus, okay, he tells him, "Oh, come save my daughter because she's sick, and she's going to die soon." Okay, and then later on, Jairus gets notified that hey, she actually died, and Jesus comes, etc., and resurrects her. In Matthew's account, when Jairus first meets Jesus, she is already dead. This is an irreconcilable contradiction. Apologists have tried a lot to reconcile this, but there's not going to be any reconciliation for this. Do you have any answer to this contradiction? Again, this is contradiction in the nativity accounts, contradiction in the resurrection accounts, contradiction in the miracle accounts. So do you have any reconciliation for Jairus' daughter contradiction?
I'm gonna further research it first before I respond to it.
No problem, no problem. So no response in the debate. What else? Let's
Well,
see
no,
what
not
else we
no
can go
response
over.
in debate. More or less the fact
I
that there's
said no
certain
response in the
things that I
debate.
still have to
I mean,
in the debate.
that's what happened.
You said in the debate.
Yeah, in the debate, this debate, you don't have a response to these things.
No, I have responses to some of them, not all of them.
Which question have I asked he actually responded to?
Many of them, including Bauckham and the fact of the
That's not a question
the
I asked
census
you.
and
That's a
the
question you asked me, and it's a census, not a
no
consensus.
and the
But
your
uh,
responses about what you asked me. But anyways, no worries.
uh, also, okay, now next to these creative freedom of the authors, can you tell me how these authors knew about these private conversations or these personal thoughts of these different characters without appealing again? Because you said yourself, I want everyone to remember, Cozz himself said in his presentation, he can't appeal to inspiration or revelation or these kind of things because we're looking at historical reliability as like a basis, as historical analysis. So you say that, oh, look, these sources have close to eyewitness accounts, they had these oral traditions, okay? Which oral tradition would have given Luke access to Herod's personal thoughts? Did Herod, this ruler, come and give Luke a personal therapy session? What's your explanation of how Luke had access to Herod's personal thoughts?
No scholar uses any arguments for the supernaturalistic parts of the Gospels because they're not considered in the actual legitimacy of historicity when they argue against it. That's faith-based rather than actual natural
I know
analysis. So if
it's not
we're
exactly, so it's not historically based. I know that's the point. It's
no,
not
it's not
historically
saying it's
based.
not historically based. It's the fact that in historical criterion they use natural presence, not presence, but natural criterions rather than supernatural ones
You're
that refer
using that
to
too.
more
You
metaphysics.
said that in your presentation. You said that in your opening statement. You're gonna explain about historical criteria specifically and not appeal to
Yes.
revelation and stuff like this.
Did I say that we could argue about the thoughts of Herodotus?
Herod, first of all, but look again. The point is, how did he have access to this information? Is there any historical
In the
plausibility for Luke
same
having
You
access
guys
case,
to this
have
you
2 minutes
can't
information?
left.
argue for this part because it's supernaturalistic, not natural. So this is
So you
not
agree?
relevant to the
So you
topic today.
agree this can't be explained. So you agree this can't be explained unless you appeal to some kind of revelation or inspiration.
That would be the case. That's not relevant to having a contradiction or anything like that. This is
I
just
didn't say it was
history
a
and the
contradiction.
study of it.
Yeah, I know it's just history. That's a debate. I'm not every analysis of history is based on contradictions. I didn't say this was a contradiction. I said you can't explain this using historical methods. Um,
And
okay,
I'll
then
clarify, I
do you have
didn't
any
say
do you
you
have
were
any
saying it's a
evidence?
contradiction, but anyways.
Okay, well, is there
You
any
guys
evidence
have
that
about
Luke
1 minute
claimed
left.
about
About
what?
what? How much time?
About 1 minute.
1 minute, okay.
1 minute, no problem. Let's look for one more question. Okay. So, I mean, he didn't address any of these things. Let's talk about maybe the genealogies, okay? So, do you agree that Matthew and
Mhm.
Luke have contradictory genealogies?
No.
Okay, so then how can Jesus been from the same ancestry as Nathan and Solomon at the same time?
Well, once again, this isn't relevant to what people would appeal to is regular history. This would refer to more oral tradition and, well, not oral tradition, tradition inside the assembly itself and what they appeal to in Judaic tradition as well. With the genealogies, many hypothesize that it's either Mary, or some even hypothesize that it's also the same
What's the evidence of that?
lineage from Joseph, but the fact that it's just more detailed. So yeah.
It can't be more detailed because again, either Jesus is from Nathan or he's from Solomon. He's giving an explicit genealogy. Okay, it says here, look, we have the Lucan account, we have the Matthean account. Okay, it says here Solomon, son of David, and Nathan, son of David. Okay, so is Jesus' ancestry go back to David through Nathan or go back to David through Solomon? Which one is it? It's either one of the
I'm
two.
going to
It can't
clarify
be
once.
both at
I'm
the
going
same
to
time.
point this out once again. I'm not arguing for absolute perfection in something.
So,
And
so
no,
you
these are
agree this
not
is an error?
major.
This is an error.
The No, these were not. This would not be an error till I further research it.
How is it not an error? It's
I
not an
already
error
told
until
you
you further
before that
research it.
many hypothesize that it's either Mary or it could be a more detailed approach to Joseph's
Mhm.
lineage. But
Well,
many
I already gave you
actually
the
say
more
it's
I already gave you the more detailed approach. Julius Africanus tried to argue for liberal marriage system that the exmission doesn't work. People try to argue for
one
Mary
person
genealogy.
is not every single person
It was actually the one of the
That is
basically the
diabolical.
widely agreed upon explanation at the time of Julius Africanus, and one of the
on
explanations
what
used today by modern
ground.
scholars on the grounds
On
of
what ground?
on the grounds of them trying to reconcile the contradiction when it is a contradictory. But look,
Well, no,
we'll
that
just end
wouldn't
it
be a
there. The cross exam
contradiction
there.
because, as Luke himself
Yeah,
says,
yeah. So that's
as was
fine, everybody.
supposed. And it was what? Sorry,
Right,
your
right.
time run
Cool.
out.
Yeah, yeah. That's the cross exam for suspected here. We
Okay, no
actually
worries.
move
No
on
problem.
to my favorite parts of any debate, the Q&A. So everybody, you guys can request up, or if you can't speak at the moment, you can
Oh
type in
yeah.
the channel. Make sure you tell us who the question is to if you're typing. And
Yeah,
yeah,
whoever wants to come up on stage, come up please and ask these questions because I mean I can't get any answers out of Cozz, so maybe y'all can do that.
yeah. All right, let's start with Michael Jordan. What's up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Make sure the question is relevant, please. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. So Quran makes historical claims, and actual history is contrary to those historical claims. And what then grounds the truth claims of the Quran, other than
Yeah,
like
so one, no
er-
problem, I'll answer you. So
bit,
this is not the topic of the debate is regarding gospel reliability, not Quranic reliability. So it's completely red herring, completely wrong to the
yeah.
debate. But second of all, do you actually want to provide evidence of the Quran making ahistorical claims when the Quran is actually very historically coherent, refers to like different historical claims that we can actually verify through Egyptology and different historical claims we can refer to the time of Jesus. For example, Jesus not claiming to be God, which is the general consensus of academics today that Jesus initially didn't claim to be God. So it's actually more historically coherent than the gospel narratives. But which examples do you have? And also, it's going to be relevant to the debate. So I'll entertain you for 1 second and then we'll move on because it's not even relevant. Go ahead.
Uh, for example, the crucifixion is determined as like a historical fact by a majority of scholarship, according
Uh-huh.
to a specific evidence, which is more plausible than makes it more
No problem. I'll
plausible
answer
than
you.
not
No
plausible.
problem. I'll answer you. No problem. I'll answer you. So
Thank
one, the Quran does not deny the historicity of the event of the crucifixion. Rather, it specifically denies that Jesus was crucified and some miraculous event occurred, like to basically intervene in that manner, right? And I've actually written a
you.
book on this called "How Was It Made to Appear So," and I can share that with the chat if anyone wants to read it. Actually, matter of fact, let me share that right now so everyone can get my position on this, right? And you can read about this how the Quran does not deny the event of the crucifixion. It agrees that people believed this at that time, which is all the history attests to, right? All you're going to find is first and second century sources attesting to that Christians believe that Jesus was crucified, right? And we agree with this fact that, like, the first people, the earliest people would have believed this, and that's what they believe to have known. But the point is, they're basing this off assumption, and it's not going against any historical claim, and it's not going against the historical event of the crucifixion. Okay, but again, it's going to be relevant to the topic. I'm not going to entertain this any further, but I've addressed this, and I'll post the book that I've co-authored with my friend a couple years ago about this topic, and you can read about it in detail if you like. Okay, I'll post it in the sources chat. Anyone who wants to read it can read it there.
All
Give
right,
me one
thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you,
second. I'll
Michael.
post it. No problem. It's gonna be in the sources chat. Anyone who
Yeah,
wants to
we'll
read
try to
it.
limit it.
Wait, how do I leave? Do I just click the red button?
Oh yeah, I'll get you down. No worries.
No, you
Go
click
ahead.
the arrow that goes below. Okay, never mind. You got it.
All right, let's see if there's any written questions.
Also, just to
Anybody
clarify, this was being
curious?
recorded, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I'd hope
Question
so.
to
Yeah.
cause. Do you believe? Question to cause. Do you believe the Bible as a whole, Old Testament plus New Testament, is historically accurate?
I would hypothesize the accuracy, but I wouldn't claim that everything, even scholars would say this, is that it's particularly in the New Testament and Old Testament, everything's hypothesized. We don't claim deductively something could be the case without substantial evidence, of course. That's why most scholars, if not all of them, are hypothesizing. So I'm not going to say they're entire errors, but I'm not going to say they're entire, like, absolute everything in order. For example, the New Testament, uh, no staff, that's well known to be hypothesized whether or not it's either, you know, different information being given to someone or not. So no, I wouldn't. Um, I would view that they are accurate in a substantial sense, but there are many. There could be small in errors. That's it. Doesn't make something historically inerrant. I mean,
All these
historically
big errors,
errant.
not just small errors, but
Anyways, so what's
regardless.
next?
Okay. Let's see who wants to be brought up. Talcum.
Ooh, who's next? Oh,
Hi,
okay.
hi guys.
Hello,
Just
Talcum.
want to say, first of all, before I get on my question, mashallah, fellow Muslims, I really saw the light of Allah in this debate, and I want to thank Suspected for showing me the truth. My question is for Cozz. What sort
Mm-hmm.
of research did you do for this debate?
Research to Bauckham and Craig Evans, and also Craig Blumberg and Richard Burridge as well. Had to try to go through a little bit more of their books, but yeah, no, I'm in honesty, in humility, I'm usually just ad hoc responding because I still have to do further research. I will not say that I'm a perfect person, so yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
Okay, that's totally fine. I wasn't going to make any sad remarks, and I'm still not going to. Thank you for your time on the stage. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You as well.
Um, let's see who's next. Squiddy. I requested for Squiddy. Squiddy
Squiddy.
asks something.
Oh, Squiddy, hey. Squiddy.
Squiddy is up.
It's funny because last time me and Squiddy were discussing, it was about historical reliability of the Quran, and we all know how that went. But
That is correct. That is correct. I actually wanted to, well, not specifically that, but something that we were discussing in that. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
yeah, we can hear. But
Yep.
please don't go into
Yeah,
something
not.
relevant, bro.
No, I'm not going to ask that. I was specifically going to elaborate on that because obviously you guys are debating the historical reliability of the Gospels. But with that being said, you do believe in the Quran. Um, so although this debate is about the historical reliability of the Gospels, again, as far as what you believe, my question is, do you have an explicit verse in the Quran which states that the Gospels have been corrupted, are historically unreliable, or anything along those lines? And all right, well, you can laugh all you want. I just want your answer. Besides
Look,
the
look.
whole besides the whole
Oh,
conscious
besides, so give me an argument. Give me an.
no,
First of all, you have
I'm
to
not
echo.
saying
You have a crazy echo.
I'm not saying it's not a valid argument, even though I think it's stupid. But I'm asking you, besides that, do you have any explicit verse in the Quran which states that the Gospels have been corrupted or unreliable, given the fact that the Quran claims to be clear? So, do you have an explicit verse on that, sir?
Okay, first of all, it's gonna be completely relevant to the debate, but sure, I can give you a verse.
I
You
love
can
you,
look at chapter
Squiddy.
5, verse 12. You can bring up chapter 5, verse 12 to 14, right? I'll read it out for you. Actually, here we go. Let's read chapter. Where's my? Uh, yeah. Okay. Bismillah, it said, and Allah had already taken a cup from the children of Israel. We delegated among them 12 leaders. Allah said, I am with you if you establish prayer and give zakat and believe in my messengers. Okay? And it says, so for breaking the covenant, we cursed them and made their hearts hard. They distort words from their proper usages and forgot a portion of that which we were reminded. And it said, and from those who say we are Christian, we took their covenant, but they forgot a portion of which they were reminded. So it applies the same phraseology applied to the Jews in regards to them distorting words from their proper usages and their context and distorting things textually very explicitly. Applies to both Christians and Jews within this context, and can't get more explicit than that. I'm not going to entertain this long for you. You coming up debate this. In fact, actually, Squiddy, if you would like, we can have a formal debate on this topic because I'm going to challenge multiple debate topics after this debate. We can have a formal debate on this if you like, but again, like this is irrelevant to the topic. Here's a verse clearly says that the Christians and and what they were given and stuff like that, and the Jews, they distorted it from the proper usages. They were like basically they forgotten a portion of which they were reminded. And it's speaking about the things that they were revealed to. We know this because it says they distort the words and the text from the from the usages, and it's speaking textually. Yeah, it's very clear. So I'm not going to entertain this any further, but there's the answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. That's talking about misinterpretation. Read Ibn Kathir, by the way, I was asking about gospel reliability, so yes, it is relevant, but thank
Right.
Yep.
Thank you, Squiddy.
W up.
See you later.
Yep,
Yeah,
let's just
because
go.
Ibn Kathir is relevant. Because Ibn Kathir
Right.
is so relevant to gospel reliability, bro. Ibn Kathir is so relevant.
Yeah,
Unfortunate,
let's
unfortunate.
move up next. Abismo.
Bismo.
Let's bring Abismo
Pepto
up. I
Bismol?
like to hear a bit.
Pepto Bismol? Oh, Abismo.
Abismo, you're
I
up.
thought it was.
Yo. Sorry, I was locally muted.
Hola,
All right,
¿cómo
so
estás, chico?
I kind of actually came here kind of like, towards like maybe like halfway through. I'm not
Yeah,
trying to
yeah, most
throw
people do.
anyone under the bus, but like I feel like Cozz kind of came like severely underprepared for, I guess, like the framing of the debate. Having said that though, so the 2 points that I'm taking from a suspected though, which I think are, I mean, they're pretty reasonable, right? And it usually does come from like the Muslim camp, and it's definitely cause
Yep.
for a lot of conflation from both ends, which is, if I could whittle it down, am I correct, suspect? And you can like reframe or correct me if I'm wrong, or you want to
No problem.
emphasize kind of like a different point of contention, which is that you find, okay, so you find the gospel not to be historically reliable because, like, for instance, taking the genealogy, the two discrepancies in the genealogies that are given, that they don't seem to be historically reliable if historical reliability requires that the genealogies be accurate. That's point number one.
Historical reliability.
Point,
Historical
go ahead.
reliability. I'll let you continue in a second. But look,
Yeah.
historical reliability doesn't depend on if there's no mistakes made. I've never said that during the whole debate. But the point
Okay.
is,
So then,
there is
go ahead.
issues throughout the whole gospel narratives when it comes to major historical claims about the whole stories of things. For example, the nativity accounts, which the genealogies are a part of, the whole
Mhm.
nativity account is constructed and fabricated. We know this because every part of it is something that couldn't have occurred historically, and it's theologically based, right? For example, the
So you're
genealogies
saying
are
that just
theologically
from the
based too.
external critique, so you aren't necessarily doing an internal critique, correct?
How are you defining
So
internal
like
and
wait,
external critique in this context?
when you make like a claim, right, that, well, even when it comes to like the nativity, there's no historical basis outside of the narrative that is given, so how can we, corroborate what the
Well,
narrative says through
it's not
any
just there's no
external means if
basis.
we don't
It's not
have
just that.
external means to do so?
It, it's not just
Do
that.
you see
It's
what
not
I
just
mean?
that. It's
That's
the
kind
fact
of
that it's not just
it's
that.
a subtle distinction between internal versus external, right?
I understand what you mean. I do understand what you
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
and
So
it's not just that. It's the fact that it contradicts what we know of the social and political history of that time, right? Cos mentioned in his opening statement.
okay, so
Cos,
if
honestly,
that's the
honestly,
claim, if that's the claim, you would need to demonstrate that.
I did. I showed you. Do you want to show you again how the
Yeah,
Luke
yeah, yeah, sure.
consensus goes against
Definitely.
how social political norms of the Roman Empire went?
Okay.
Am I still streaming? Yeah, look right here. I showed
Yeah.
this multiple times, right? Luke claims that Caesar Augustus imposed a tax census
Ah,
upon
this one.
the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
empire, on the whole empire, including the kingdom of Judea, right? But the kingdom of Judea at the time was a client kingdom, and Romans didn't impose taxes on client kingdoms. All they did was let them run their own
They
kingdom and
wanted
then take a
gifts.
tribute from
That's
Herod.
correct. They wanted gifts.
Exactly. And they didn't impose taxes of the empire
Okay.
onto the citizens of the client kingdom. Do you understand? And
Have
there's
you
other examples of this too. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so while we're on this topic, and I do have a second follow-up question too, if that's okay, all
No
right?
problem,
And
no
and
problem.
I'm
I'd
not
like you to
trying to
continue
like
because you actually understand
like
what I'm saying. I'd like
yeah,
you to
I don't want
continue.
to like revisit like parts of the debate too if you feel like it's not relevant because like I'm not the
No,
principal
go ahead,
debater or
Say
anything
what you
like
want to say,
this.
no problem. Go ahead.
But okay, so so let me just throw a response out there just so I can understand your position a little bit more, okay? What do you think about the response that uh in the case that the narrative itself, uh the narrative focus may have been not particularly intended for exact historical accuracy, but more for like a theological idea. And in that regard, the narrative itself, written by human authors, may have overlooked uh, clarifying maybe hidden assumptions about whether a census conducted by Herod Antipas would have been considered as a census given by the Romans, given the fact that the 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 Jewish kings at that time, right, would have been I guess like naturally, or it would have been culturally understood within you know relative to the audience that this particular narrative is hypothesized to have addressed, that you know the Herod at the time was an agent of the emperor rather than of the people.
Okay, again, so
You get
look,
what I mean?
multiple things. First of all,
Yeah.
you're saying a couple different things. First of all, regards to, oh, what if they're just being more theological than historically accurate? Well, at that point, you're just conceding to the debate, because the debate is under the
Okay.
pretenses that the
No, I
Gospels are.
think you would be no, you're overstating there. You would be overstating, because if we were to apply that same strict criterion for the Quran, you would have to invalidate the historical reliability of the Quran on the same grounds.
No, no, because
So
again,
even
you
if you
can't
wanted to, even
demonstrate.
if
You
you
can't
wanted to
demonstrate.
challenge,
You can't
even if
demonstrate.
you wanted to challenge whether the event of the crucifixion involved the clone Jesus, you wouldn't be able to maintain that
First of all,
historically,
I
right?
didn't
So
say. First of all,
basically,
first.
I'm
No,
not,
no, I didn't
I'm
say
not
that.
forcing you in the
Straw man.
position to substitute the Quran for the Gospels, but insofar as we want to do a historical analysis, it becomes difficult to maintain that for standard
It doesn't.
Mohammedan
I'll tell you
teaching as
why.
well
I'll tell
on
you
his
why. I'll
on
tell you why.
historicity.
I'll,
Go ahead.
I'll tell you why it doesn't. Because one, first of all, I didn't claim that Jesus was replaced by a decode. That is only one theory of different theories
It's standard
proposed
Mohammedan
by
teaching.
Muslim scholars. There's different theories on this, right? And I've
Okay.
talked about this in my book, How Was It Made to
Yeah,
Appease,
yeah.
which I've linked. You can read about it later if you want. But
Okay.
the point is, the Quran doesn't deny the event of the crucifixion itself, so it doesn't go against any historical source. The only sources we have early on is things like Josephus. We have like Tacitus, this kind of thing, which I can address if I
Yeah.
want to, but I don't even need to, because again, I'm not
Philo.
contending that this event
Yeah.
occurred, right? I'm not
Yeah.
contending this event could. And in regards to what you said about Jewish kings and stuff
That
like
that
that, and oh, maybe
okay,
Herod
okay, hold on. That's not what I'm talking about. We're still talking about the census. So I was just throwing out, right?
said crucifixion.
Okay, of the socio-cultural assumptions that we could make, right? Sits and Leben, setting in life. Let's. Would you be willing to take it for granted that when the gospel writers were saying that the census was given by the Romans, it was already a, I guess, like a presupposition, right, that the authors had, that it would have been known that Herod would have been understood more as an agent of the Roman state rather than of the Jewish people?
There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence to provide the gospel authors
No,
show any
but
knowledge of the Herod being an agent of the
would you
state.
grant that assumption based on the socioeconomic conditions at the time?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you why. No, I'll tell you why. Because we know the reason why Luke makes this mix-up. It's not for the reasons you're giving. That
Pause.
he thought
Why
there was
are you
maybe.
appealing? Why are you appealing to the Gospels instead
What?
of the external critique? You can't. You keep
No, again,
moving
look,
between
look.
back and
My
forth
arguments,
between an external
My
critique and
arguments,
internal
my
critique.
arguments,
You just
my I
appeal to
have
Luke.
my Abbas. My arguments are both external and internal. I'm showing internal and external issues with these narrative accounts. I showed contradictions, internal
Yeah, but
inconsistencies,
you have
and
to
I'm
avoid
explaining. Just listen
conflating.
to me. Just
You
listen
have
to
to
me.
avoid
Just listen to me.
conflating.
I'm not conflating it. Listen to me. I'm explaining to you
If you make a
where
claim
Luke.
from the
Listen
external
to me.
critique,
Just
you have
listen
to
to me.
stick
Listen to
with
me.
it.
Listen to me. You said, oh, it's possible to assume that the gospel authors had this presumption about the and the socio-political nature of Rome at that time, that Herod was more of an agent. What you're doing now is speaking of the gospel author's view of how external political affairs are
Right,
being
that
run.
would be called the sits
I'm
and
giving,
Leben, or the setting
I'm
in
explaining
life.
to you, I'm
All
explaining
I
to you.
was
Well, well,
asking is
answer.
whether, from your
Just
Abbas,
position,
listen,
you would
please
be
just
willing
listen,
listen.
to
Abbas,
Let
grant
Abbas.
him
that
finish.
assumption.
You don't, let's Abbas,
Yeah,
just
Abu,
listen.
go ahead.
Just listen.
Yeah,
You need to
yeah,
understand this.
but
Well,
please
no,
let
We
him
I
finish
know
his
think you're trying to
response, because this
reframe
is a
what I'm
Q&A,
saying,
not an
which
open
is
dialogue.
that's fine. Look, but the
yeah.
point is, look, Abbas, you need to understand. We know why Luke makes this mix
No, no,
up,
no.
right?
Okay,
I'll show you.
again, stop using language like you
Bro,
need to understand. You need to demonstrate to me first why you would not grant that particular assumption.
I'm explaining to you because I'm showing you that we have
Okay.
evidence that Luke, okay, this presumption that Luke is that you're claiming he could have made, we
Okay.
know that he had a different presumption than the presumption that you're making. Okay, that's what I'm
Okay.
trying to
Okay.
explain to
All
you. Your
right. All
theory
right. This is better. Let's go.
doesn't cook because how do
Okay.
we know this, right? If we go here, where is this?
Because
One
Bart Ehrman
second,
brings this up as well.
right
So
here. Look at this.
I'm curious to see what you. Yeah.
Here's the presentation I did on the nativity accounts. few weeks ago. Here, look, right? This is from Luke, the unreliable historian, right? According to academics, Luke's confusion has a historical explanation in that he confused two major events in the Roman Empire. He confuses two rebellions, the kingdom 1 in 4 BC and 1 6 AD. And this is according to Sir Ronald Syme, the New Testament account is based on Luke's confusion of two notable events. And we know this why? Because he further shows this confusion in the book of Acts, the same author of Luke, right? This is Giza Vermes in his book, Nativity, Passion, and Resurrection. He says, incidentally, this is not the only error of Luke in the domain of historiography. In Acts 5:37, he asserts that the revolutionary Theodus, who according to Josephus rose under the procurator Faddus in 44 to 46, preceded Judas the Galilean in the days of the census. By putting him before 86, Luke predates Theodus by some 40 years, a substantive error in what it was in the days of the contemporary history. So what does this mean? This means that Luke was mixing up two different events, and he makes this mix up based on the order of events that Josephus mentions, which one shows reliance on Josephus, two shows that it's this mix up, and the reason he puts the census at both the time of Quirinius and Herod isn't because of this presumption of like, oh, client kings couldn't possibly give because you're more of an agent of Caesar Augustus.
Right.
No,
Well,
it was
I
because
was
it was
right.
um it was because of him making a mix-up on Josephus' writings. One more point as well to make.
Okay.
If you actually look into the history between Herod and Caesar Augustus, Herod and Caesar Augustus had more and more tense relations by the end of his life. And
Okay,
Caesar Augustus was
pause.
almost gonna cut. Caesar Augustus was almost gonna cut ties with Herod by the end of
Well,
Herod's life. And you're
that was
claiming,
always that was literally the socio-cultural political situation at the time,
yeah,
and
no.
we
But the
can go
point is, you're
back and
saying Herod
forth
was
of
this
how to
agent of Caesar. One second,
pedagogically
you're saying Herod is this agent of
pause,
Caesar.
pause. Okay, the
I'm
specific
pausing. Okay,
reason
go ahead.
why I framed it as I just wanted your response about that particular assumption and
I
whether
did
you
though.
would grant it or not, in order to kind of clarify, which you did sufficiently. You did a great job of clarifying, from the external critique, why you are led more to believe that uh, that Luke is not accurate at all, given what we know from the external critique about what happened during the history at the time. And this you would actually be correct about, because this is what Bart Ehrman also talks quite a bit about. The issue, though, becomes right, and I think why I can see why you want to move quickly, and I'm not saying like you're being underhanded at all, because I don't think
It's
you
because it's a
are, but
Q&A.
really the
I'm not
only
moving
things
quickly
that we
because of
have left to talk,
any sub.
hold on, right, the only things we would really have left to talk about then is what was really categorically that relationship between the Jews and the Romans, right? Perfectly reasonable question to ask.
You mean between Herod and Caesar, not between the
the,
Jews
the,
and the
the
Romans?
but the problem is there's a possibility here suspected that you on your side within the external critique could be overstating your case, simply because we do not have a symmetry breaker here, and that is the record of Roman census is not
We do have that.
as clear cut. No, we
It
actually
is.
don't.
It is.
For this
We
period
do.
of
We
time,
do.
we actually
Every
don't.
scholar.
Nope.
We literally do. We
We
literally have.
don't have a
Look
full
at any.
Roman census
Look at any New
record.
Testament scholar.
Nope,
Look at
no,
New
we
Testament
actually
scholars.
don't.
One second.
You're
Abysmal. Abysmal.
factually
Abysmal.
you're
Abysmal.
factually wrong on
Listen.
this.
Listen. Listen.
No,
Listen.
and you're
Listen.
Yeah,
assuming
Abysmal.
but
that
Wait.
because
Just
can I
listen.
Christianity
can
You're
I
is
can I
coming at
stop
the
misunderstanding.
you guys
argument
with
from
Yo,
that
Abysmal.
perspective,
Abysmal. Wait.
that
Abysmal. Wait. You can't keep
we
speaking. Listen.
literally don't.
both
I
can
didn't
both of you
say.
wait
Listen,
for a
Abysmal.
second?
I'm not saying.
We don't have
I'll
a
just say this
complete
last thing.
list
Look,
of every census that the
Abysmal.
Romans did.
Abysmal.
That's the problem.
Obviously, listen. Abysmal. Stop speaking.
I would be more willing to
Obviously, listen.
entertain
Just
your external
listen.
critique
Just
if that
listen.
was the
Just
case. That's
listen.
all I would have to say.
Listen, bro. Are you
Okay,
done?
okay,
This
that's
guy.
enough. That's enough. That's enough. That's enough.
He keeps interrupting too much. Listen, and
This
I
is
want to make
turning
clear to him. I'm
into.
not claiming. One second. I'm not claiming that we have a record of every single person that lived in Judea at that time and the Roman Empire through the census. Obviously not. What I'm saying is we have census records in the sense of how many people were taxed. Okay, we have the numbers. We have whether they taxed client kings or not, and when these were done, and we have multiple instances of these censuses. We have inscriptions, we have manuscripts, we have records and writings of different people in authority writing about this. We know how censuses operated at that time. That's the part you're not understanding. And again, this is not even gonna begin. It doesn't even begin to solve the issue with the census, with the idea of the ancestral homeland, which caused or you didn't address at all. And I'm gonna emphasize it more if anyone wants to ask about this more. And the misdating, which Luke puts as a 10-year gap. There's so many issues with the census. It's issue after issue after issue, which is why scholars consider it to not be historical. Look at what this is. This is, for example, from Raymond Brown's book, Birth of the Messiah. He writes an 800-page book, 800-page book just about the nativity accounts. Hundreds of pages just dedicated to what we spoke about in the last 10 minutes. What does he say? He says, we are not dealing with memories from family history, but with a carefully planned dramatization of the theology of salvation history. Right? Here's another quote. Okay? Where is it? Anyways, you get the point. All right. So like even scholars agree this is just basically like a dramatization that Luke is doing because of the issue after issue after issue that Luke falls into. Okay. And I've addressed your claims very clearly. You didn't understand some of my points, and you strawman me on claiming we have direct census records. I've given you enough time.
Right.
Other people can come up and contend. Abysmal, if you would like, you can DM me and we can set up a formal debate on this topic or any other topic if you'd like to. And on that
Yeah.
topic, while I'm here,
I
I'll
am
just make sure. And sorry, Abdul, sorry to interrupt you again. While everyone's
sorry.
here, I would like to challenge any other Christian for any other debate topic. If we'd like to discuss whether Prophet Muhammad's found in the Bible, we can discuss the theology and the Christology of the Gospels or the New Testament. We can discuss whether the Quran or the Gospels are more historically reliable or theologically coherent. We can discuss whether Islam or Christianity is more theologically or historically coherent in general. We can debate about many different topics and any of the topics that we've discussed, Abdul, before. Okay, so anyone who'd like to discuss this topic, we can discuss. And we can set
Yeah,
up a
that's
formal debate.
lovely.
I'll do it from 1 week, I'll do it from 2 weeks, I'll do it from 3 weeks, however much preparation time you need.
Lovely, lovely.
And also,
Abismo,
and just
I'm going
keep
to
in
have to
mind,
bring
and
you
just
down
keep in mind.
unfortunately because this is
Mhm.
you've been talking for about 8 minutes. I'm going to have to bring you down to let
Yeah,
more room for other people. But at the end of this debate, you will have a way of connecting back into to
we
suspected
can
and
do an open
continuing this.
VC, an open VC after, yeah. But
Yeah,
also keep in mind any of these debates, any Christians want to come and challenge these claims. You want to go do research, the research that like of Cozz wants to go do research, or other ones will do research on behalf of Cozz and come discuss these things with me. I discuss these things every day, hold lectures, hold events, and hold debates, and informal and formal in VCs and discord.gg/Sunni in the Islam server. If the link is in my bio, join the server, inshallah, and you can join these debates for any Christian here who wants to contend my claims. I'll be in that server, discord.gg/Sunni. The link is in my bio.
Link of Christ Centered
All
is
right.
in my bio as well if you want to join it to learn more. And open anybody to dialogue. I'm curious about it. I encourage everybody to dialogue with me so I can keep on learning. And the more I learn, the better I am. So I'm glad to inquire. And also, suspected, I wouldn't mind having a rematch, although you may not consider it. I don't mind it at all. But yeah, I would love to, as soon as I
mm,
Yeah.
further research and I confirm more things, then I would love to have a rematch with you. That'd be
I would be
wonderful.
down. I would even be down to the point of doing a rematch where I use the exact same points in presentation and don't change a single thing
Sure.
because I really don't think these
Absolutely
things
understand.
change
Yep,
much.
that's fine. That's completely fine. That's completely fine. I would love
all
to.
right,
Anyways,
All right.
go
All
ahead.
right.
all
You
right.
want to bring anyone else up?
We're actually about 10 minutes over the Q&A time. Should
We'll
we
let
just
one
move
Oh
more
on
up
to
no.
because
the
Abysmal took a lot of time. It doesn't matter. Q&A doesn't have to be a specific time. Look, anyone want to bring anyone else up who wants to come up? I think we had conclusions planned, but I don't think we need to do that. Like we kind of already went over
Yeah, we can
everything.
just
It's just anyone
yeah.
else wants to come up can ask a question. Otherwise, if there's not any big substantial questions or any knowledgeable person wants to come up, we can open up a open VC and talk
Mhm.
there.
All right. Anybody want to request up?
Any Fibonacci sequences want to come up?
Hold on. What do you know about the fibs?
What do you know about them fibs? Wait, Cause, what do you know about them fibs, bro?
By
What
the
do you
way,
know about the
Suspected
Pardon?
Priest
382 and the
every
Sorry,
time that
what?
786?
counts.
Sorry, what?
What do you know about them 382s and them 786s, bro?
What?
Yeah,
Never
he
mind.
doesn't know his
Anyways,
class.
Yeah.
who wants
I
to
don't
come
think
up?
there's
Anyone else
any
wants to come
more.
up?
Hmm. I don't
All
think
right,
there's
all right.
any
Wait, wait,
more
wait.
questions. You know,
Bring up Yazan Al Maqdisi. Bring that guy up.
Yeah, yeah. Pull him up.
he's not requesting up. If he wants to request,
He
No, no,
is.
up.
he just
He's
did.
requesting now. Also, Fortnite Boys in the chat too. Fortnite Boy, if you want to come
Yes,
up, there's
Zan
a new
too.
voice up.
Ooh,
You can
there's
speak the
more
questions if
questions
you
now.
want.
Okay, okay. More people coming in.
Assalamu
Hell
Hello,
yeah,
alaikum.
Yazan.
Zan, the big
Hey,
YZ, the big
Assalamu
Fib, the big
alaikum.
786, the big 382. What's
what's up?
good?
What's up? We lost 25 bands today, but we're still up 45 on the month. Shout out. Cause, he did as whatever his name is said, I think you're a little underprepared. Better luck next time. Um, if y'all don't know what the 382 and 786 has done for us, you're missing out. Okay. Let me tell you something.
Mm.
Volt is
Let's go,
capital.
let's go.
Volt is capital. Follow the movement. Islam is true. Volt is capital is the truth. Shout out Joe. Shout out Suspected. Shout out my
Love you,
homeboy
man.
in
No, but for anyone who wants to, we have a trade day trading group that we're currently running. Anyone wants to join, DM me for inquiries, and so you can make some money, bruh.
Right.
We'll do that shit, bro. Anyone DM me for
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah.
Want to inquire into that?
Big Ponzi scheme shit going on.
Yeah, pyramid
Yeah,
scheme,
Yazin, do
scam
you have a
type
question
shit.
to Cozz? Do you have a question to Cozz, Yazin?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
actually, cause
Sure. Any question?
what's your form of reconciliation for various and or sorry differing gospel accounts for the same event? What is your best reconciliation? For example, just take the staff contradiction, right? We know, of
Hmm.
course, two of the writers in the account weren't even present, so you have to assume they received it from somebody who was. However, the one that was, according to the only knowledge we have access to, has a different
Hmm.
account. So what's your method
Yeah,
of reconciling this thing?
I would base it on the fact that small errors, or let's just say small differentiations of something, doesn't necessarily mean that an event isn't true. For example, the no staff thing can simply be in the fact that one person who's an eyewitness of it saying this thing, another person who's not an eyewitness of it, but using oral tradition and written tradition, as they talk about in the first part of the chapter of their gospel, talking about it. It can be based upon that as well. But yeah, the my reconciliation would just be the fact that harmony and theme is not the same thing as harmony in the chronology of specific things. That's what even ancient biographies um, are established with that criterion. That's all.
Yeah, I wouldn't, and I don't
Yeah.
want to take too much of your time. I wouldn't say that this is a fabrication of the event. I would just say that it brings up the question of then what it really is divine inspiration, right? Because if
Yeah,
we're
no, I
presuming,
understand
Over and
that. Yeah,
over again,
I understand
contradiction
what
after
that means. Yeah.
contradiction after. It's not just one minor one; it's 100 minor ones, 50 major ones. Like it becomes a problem after a
yeah,
Well,
while.
once
yeah,
again,
It
and
becomes a
then
Yazin.
that
problem.
my
Right.
my real
Let's
like
just
kind
stick
of
to one person asking the question, please. Like, let's stick to Yazin for now.
Oh,
no
sorry,
No
problem.
sorry
way,
about
no
that.
way.
No problem. Then my follow up point would be like not just reconciliation for reliability, because also I'm not like posing that the majority of the events are fabricated. It's just if there is such issues, it brings up the question of what is divine inspiration given these issues. I mean,
I
how
understand
can
what
you
you're saying.
presume
I
that?
understand where you're coming
Yeah,
from. Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. The point is that what I do is and I've followed this moral principle since the beginning is as I continue researching, and I won't hold to a specific view if it's inconsistent. If it's consistent, I will establish that and be honest about it. But the thing is that with certain claims, like I'm trying to avoid doing a too quick way and going to the Quran. But when it comes to the Bible, the more you research about something, if the something is true, you have to be honest about it and say something is true. Something is false, you have to be honest and say it's false. When it comes to these researches, based on my current knowledge, I would say that the reconciliation would be on the harmony of theme rather than the harmony of chronology. And the fact that someone in oral tradition could either be correcting something, which doesn't necessarily mean it's divine revelation. For example, divine revelation can be specifically related to only that which is related to the fulfillment of Old Testament things in our context. It could be different for the Quranic context. But yeah, so the whole point is that like no staff doesn't constitute all divine revelation. So I wouldn't take that as a major problem.
but you would say that the authors that were writing the accounts were all divinely inspired and being guided, right?
Divinely inspired in specific aspects, yes. In their own opinions, for example, the commentaries in John's Gospel, we can see that there's commentaries.
Okay. Now, if
So
there
yeah,
were any sort of implications of theological issues or contradictory narratives to the point where it's like, is this the same agent doing divine inspiration? Well, actually, I would let suspected bring up an example
sorry,
like
what?
that. But
I
I'm
apologize, I didn't
saying
hear that.
if there was
Wait,
contradictory narratives, right, and they're also very uh, problematic for theological purposes, right, then that would bring
Yeah,
up
yeah.
the
The, the,
question of
the the
what
thing is,
divine
that's the thing.
agent
That's the
is.
thing. Yeah, because the thing isn't because they say that look, there's these contradictions that only like for example in certain details of narratives. But what they don't understand is there's major theological contradictions both in quotations of prophecies and in themes themselves. The themes themselves are
Mhm.
contradictory. For example,
Yeah.
one of Mark's known themes is the secret Messiah theme and also like the ignorant disciples theme. And the reason he builds on this theme is because of his mimesis literary device when he's building upon Homer's epics and stuff
Right.
like this. And he's trying to like trying to portray the disciples as stupid and these kind of things, and portray Jesus as not wanting to tell anyone he's the Messiah. That part, his whole theme is contradictory to the other themes of John, where he's going around saying, "Well, according to Christians, oh, I am God and I'm the Messiah and everything." When in Mark, he's not telling anyone this. So it's not just the contradictions in minor details, but contradiction in the themes as a whole. Like the
Yeah.
whole literary narratives themselves are
I would
contradictory.
disagree with that, but I can respond to that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Yezan, do you have any further questions?
No, that's all. Thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it. You're a great moderator. And shout out Voltus Capital. Assalamu alaikum.
Uh,
Yeah. Lovely. All right. I'll bring over the next person.
oh, can you bring up
All right.
servant, please?
How many questions? Like how long is the Q&A again?
We'll do one more. We'll do one more. Servant can come up.
You know,
Last one.
Okay.
you can end it whenever you want. Like we're already over the time. I'll just
We'll
Oh,
do
we're
bring up
one
already
more.
over
We'll
the
do one more.
time.
Bring up
Okay.
seven. We'll do one more. Bring up seven. Bring up seven. One more. One more. Go ahead. Bring up seven.
Yeah, I told him to come.
He's requesting.
Yeah, I told him to come on.
All right. All right.
Assalamu
Okay.
alaikum.
Yo, was
Wa
good,
alaikum
Salam,
assalam wa
G?
I'm
rahmatullah.
sorry.
Loki, I almost fell asleep waiting, man. How you guys doing?
Was good. What do you think of the debate, bro?
Honestly, it's an easy debate, bro. You could finish it. Me, if I were to debate this, it'd be over in 10 minutes. Really just depends on the.
Yeah,
Damn.
I just want to ask
yeah, it's like,
Koza a quick question.
Sure.
Uh,
mhm.
regarding the primary codicy, which is Sinaiticus, basically comprising the entire New Testament. My
Yep.
question would be to you: do we have a known traceable tradition that we can look to understand who and when and how this codicy was comprised and from where the information was extracted?
It would primarily be based on the passed down tradition which Irenaeus speaks of. But once again, I would just say that I would rather not talk about it because I'm focusing on my
Okay.
mindset's focused on the Gospels themselves. So sorry about that, by the
Do,
way.
do you mean no problem? Do you mean Eusebius? Because Irenaeus is writing in like the 2nd century. He's the primary component
Eusebius is a
for
century
the.
after. No, so Eusebius is used as a primary proponent of it, but Irenaeus itself, Eusebius bases a lot of his knowledge on Irenaeus as well, and we can use them literally intertwined with each other, along with Pappy's statements, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
So, so you weren't able to answer the question. So we don't. Do we have a traceable tradition? Because remember, we're talking about
As I
the
said, the
fourth
traceable
century.
tradition would be through Irenaeus, as he defined it, which is the passed down
Yeah.
tradition from the apostles, the eyewitnesses, to those who were eyewitnesses of the eyewitnesses, or the disciples of the
Okay.
apostles, and then all the way down through the generations of succeeding bishops and so on who
What
taught
about
the same
Irenaeus?
doctrine.
What about Irenaeus? What about Irenaeus being unreliable in narrating details from the apostles? For example, he claims Jesus was like over 50, 40 and 50 years old, and he continued his ministry into old age, and this information comes from the apostles. So how can you consider him
Mhm.
reliable when he makes explicitly wrong claims about major claims about Jesus' life being
Not,
incorrect when he says he
not,
gets from the apostles?
I won't respond
yeah,
to
not
that
there's nothing.
currently, but yeah,
All right,
No, no
sure.
problem.
I can respond to it
What's
later,
funny
but
is
I'm not
that
going to
in the
respond to it
canon,
here.
a
Okay,
fun
no
fact
problem.
in regard to like the canonization of the New Testament, when Constantine basically commissions Eusebius, Eusebius does not appeal to Irenaeus at all. He actually appears to harmonize the canon of the four Gospels, which we get that from Tatian. Yeah.
Are
So and we
we
get that from
doing
Justin
just
Mar's
like
disciple.
Q&A now, or just we just talking about random other things
No,
now? I don't
All right,
no.
all right.
mean to
So
That's
interrupt
fine.
you.
That's fine. That's fine.
I
just
think
real
there's
quick,
been a
real quick.
question. Yeah.
I don't. My question was very simple, and the thing is when you mention Irenaeus, that has nothing to do with the actual codicy, because we're talking about is the codicy, the Sinaiticus, Aleph, is it the received text, or was it comprised, or excuse me,
You said
composed
the oral
in the fourth
tradition,
century?
which is traceable.
No, no. So okay,
You asked
so
about the
you're
traceable oral
saying
tradition, so I provided that through
um,
Irenaeus, who gives a confession of the faith
the,
that
the
was passed down as he articulates.
the codices are composed, they're texts, they're not just oral tradition. My question was, can we trace a tradition
The
where we
codices are a
can actually
compilation of a bunch
receive?
of manuscripts. Yeah,
Okay, and that's what I was asking you. Like, who was involved, and when was this? Where did this occur, and how did this occur? Is kind of my question.
who was involved? Are you asking like
Yeah.
the content involving in the events prior, like directly
Yes.
prior to the Council of Constantinople?
So yes, if we're talking about reception of the New Testament, we need to examine who composed these codices, when and how they were composed. Is it systematic and is it traceable? That's the whole point of my question. Do you have
I
this or
have
do you
no
not?
opinion on it right now.
Okay, you just don't know, and that's fine. No problem. That's really my
No,
question,
it's not that I
F1.
don't know. It's just that I have no opinion on it. The difference is if I said I don't know, I would be able to like say to you, I
Okay.
will have be able to answer, but I just have no opinion on it right now.
So for everybody watching here, this is exactly why the debate with me would be over in 10 minutes because he knows about it, but he doesn't want to give a comment or an opinion on what he
Right.
knows based on my question.
Right.
No, it's called I'm further
Sure. But
establishing my
Well,
knowledge right
uh,
now.
that was lovely. That was lovely. But
okay,
do you,
thank you.
if
Anyways,
there's no more questions, we
خلاص, let's
can.
wrap up from here.
alright,
Anyways, thank you all for listening. Blah blah blah. Thank you, Cozz, for being in the debate. I would like to challenge any
God
other
bless
Christian
you.
for
Thank
certain
you very
debate
much.
topic. Is Prophet Muhammad in the Bible? Is the Gospels historically reliable? Christology, the New Testament, historical library of the Quran. I'll be happy to discuss any of these things. Um, if anyone wants to come and press me or ask any questions or debate me or just discuss in general Muslim
Yeah.
or Christian, I'll be in the Islam server in a second and I'll be in a VC there. Okay, so that's pretty much wrapped up from there. And also, Abdul, get me that recording, please, when you can. I'll appreciate that very, very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
God bless you
Thanks
guys.
to
God bless
both
you guys.
respective. Both people will be at their respective servers in their main VCs. Any more
All right, bye,
questions
bye,
of
bye, bye, bye.
or you think that they
No, no, no. That's
blundered at
I have the link of
we go
CC in my
back.
profile bio, by the way. So if anybody wants to join Christ Centered and just gain more
Yeah,
knowledge
shout
from
out,
the
guys,
Christian
and big
perspective,
shout
then
out
you
to
can
the
come.
other Islam server. I am going to go to sleep now.
All right, see you guys. See you guys. Salam, everyone. Everyone come to the Islam server, inshallah, to ask questions and discuss.
All right.
God bless you guys. God bless you guys.